Welcome back to the Peace, Power, and Purpose podcast. Memorial Day is more than a long weekend. It's more than cookouts, boats, and time off work. It's about sacrifice. It's about service. It's about the men and women who gave pieces of themselves physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually in service to this country. Tonight's guest is John Alvarez, a combat aviator, a veteran, a husband, a father, a man who refused to quit after life changed forever. His upcoming book, Walk, Run, Fly Again, releases this weekend. And after hearing his story, you'll understand why that title carries so much weight. This conversation is about resilience, brotherhood, purpose, adversity, and what it means to keep moving forward when life knocks you to the ground. This is the Peace, Power, and Purpose podcast, where we spread awareness for men's mental health and spread the gospel of Jesus Christ. Be sure to like and subscribe on YouTube and Spotify. New episodes drop weekly. Lord, I pray that you will guide me through your Holy Spirit, that you will lead me through this episode, and that you will give me strength, you'll give me courage, and I'll be able to share John's story with just people that need to hear it, Lord, that we will bring awareness for mental health, but also to spread the gospel of you, Lord. And I pray you'll bless John, bless his family, and just bless the people that are watching this episode and be with those that have lost loved ones, because we're doing this episode in honor of Memorial Day. And I just pray you be with the families, be with our military, and be with those that are family members of the military and those that have loved ones that are deployed in harm's way right now, Lord. Thank you for this opportunity again and this platform. It's in your mighty name that I pray. Amen.
Amen.
John Alvarez, thank you so much, man, for coming on the Peace, Power, and Purpose podcast. I'm really excited about this episode tonight, man.
Thank you, Steve. Pleasure to be here, and thank you for the invite.
Yeah, and I want to just give PJ a shout out. PJ Wright introduced us, and PJ's been on the show, fellow Air Force service member. So we're grateful for PJ. PJ, thanks for making this connection. And John, I start off each episode kind of from the beginning. Just I want to kind of get an overview of childhood, what that was like growing up for you, and then we'll kind of work our way into your career into the military, and then where you are in present day.
All right. Good deal.
So where are you from, man? Where'd you grow up?
All right. I grew up in South Florida, Miami, Florida Keys, even a little bit of time in Tampa, back to South Florida.
Okay.
My parents and my grandparents were exiles from Cuba, came over between 1959 to about 1962. Most of my family got out. My maternal grandfather served some political prisoner time, both under Batista and then after the revolution under Castro also. So, my parents my dad was in college studying to be a physicist in math, and came to the United States, started working in a window factory by a company, a big company in Florida that's famous in Tampa called Jim Walter Corporation. And so his foreman saw him doing something with a slide rule where he's supposed to be doing shit on the aluminum windows. And they asked him, "What are you doing?" He goes, "I'm trying to make sure we don't waste all this aluminum and making these calculations." He's got this handwritten spreadsheet. And the guy goes, "Where did you learn all this?" Because my dad could barely speak English at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And they brought him into the engineering shop. They figured out, man, this guy's pretty smart, and actually got his engineering degree, became an industrial engineer, and later started his own companies.
Wow.
My family's blessed because, they were able to escape Cuba. Maternal grandfather's family left Spain during the Civil War there, and then, left Cuba during the Civil War or revolution there, but been able to live the American dream.
Nice.
And flourish. I mean, I grew up in South Florida. I went to the University of Miami to hopefully play baseball.
No way. I didn't know that. I missed. Okay, nice. That's awesome.
Didn't make the baseball team, but I played soccer at Miami and I had a partial scholarship, and then screwed up in college, lost my scholarship and had to go back to work. But I got through. And and I was there during the heyday in Miami. In the
nice.
80s,
Yeah.
Late 80s. And graduated in 86. I actually, when I was as a kid, had a wonderful, background. especially in the Florida Keys and fishing and diving and
Yeah.
um, big Jimmy Buffett fan,
Okay.
huge.
Yeah, I
Since I
read that
was
in
a
the
little
book. Yeah,
kid,
yeah,
Neil
I remember
Diamond and
reading that in
stuff,
the book. Yeah,
right?
okay. Yeah.
And so I was being so as far as childhood and then wanting to be in the military. I used to read about the frogmen and
Mhm.
and also jet pilots, astronauts. My dad was an amateur astronomer, so we used to go to the Miami Astronomy Museum and stuff. And we used to drive up. We used to drive up the coast to watch the space launches. So when I was a
Nice.
kid, I got to watch some of the late Apollo launches, shuttle launches, and stuff. So also as a kid, I wanted to be an astronaut, wanted to be a pilot, all this stuff,
Yeah, that's really cool.
and also wanted to be an architect. I wanted to be like Indiana Jones.
Yeah,
So all kinds of crazy stuff. But when I was in high school and playing sports and stuff, I was being recruited, and I was looking at going to the Naval Academy.
nice, okay.
And because of my parents' experience in Cuba, they were so dead set against me going to the military,
Mm,
and they really didn't understand the process in the United States and stuff. So I got the scholarship offer from Miami and set that aside and went to Miami to study architecture and architectural engineering and actually work, like I said, work through college. And at the final stages of college, because it's a private school, I'm like, man, a lot of debt. I got to pay for school. I was then again being recruited by the Navy,
hmm,
but this time to go into civil engineering.
wow.
And then one day I walk into the um, recruiting station in Miami, and there's a big jet, big A6, over a carrier F-14 in the back, big mural on the wall, and this aviation recruiter goes, "Hey, you interested in flying?" And I'm like, Yeah, I am."
What year is this? What year was
This was
this?
1986,
So Top Gun was out.
right before
Oh,
Top
okay,
Gun released, right? It
okay,
hadn't released yet. So
okay.
in 85, 86. And the engineering recruiter's like, "No, he's going engineering. He's gonna be a civil engineer." No. So
Hell
the
no.
guy the pilot slips me his card. So I call and then I'm like, okay. He goes, "Well, you got to take a test, and vision and all this stuff." And
Mhm,
so I come in and take the aptitude test. I nailed it. And he goes, "Hey, you can go to, if you can get through this officer program, he goes, and a lot of people don't make it, you're guaranteed to go to flight school." So while that was going on, I'm trying to decide, I went to the Air Force recruiter just to see, right?
yeah,
Um, they're like, "Hey, your grades aren't that great." They weren't as interested in me. I had decent grades, but not great grades. Marine Corps was interested, right? So I'm coming down. I'm like, well, okay, what am I going to do? And that same recruiter, this guy was a Navy A7 pilot who had
okay.
ejected twice out of a
Wow,
jet. They
wow.
took me out on a T-34 ride, which is at the trainer that they were using at the time, but it was the older version of the trainer that didn't have the turboprop engine in it.
Okay.
And they had him at recruiting stations throughout the country. So I went on a ride with him, acrobatic ride. I'm like, man, this is what I want to do.
Dang,
Right.
that's
And
cool.
and he gives me tickets to the opening of Top Gun.
Nice, dude. That's a best
So
recruiting movie of all
right,
time.
I go to the movie with a buddy of mine and his dad. His father was a pediatrician, and Mr. Uh, he was an Air Force officer, and he couldn't go to flight. So I don't know if his eyes went bad. I can't remember the exact reason, but it was a medical reason. So he was a doc. Air Force paid for that, and then he got out, and he goes, "John, you're young enough. If this is your dream, do it. You can always go back, right? You could always." And and meanwhile, I had great parents. I have great parents. They're still alive. God bless them. I am blessed to have the parents I have. I mean, they've had a wonderful relationship. They've been mentors, and examples to us on how to treat each other as a married couple, and incredible parents. But my father, at that point, it was engineering is the international language. That's what he said. Something happens anywhere in the world, you can go anywhere. Math is the international language, and and I was actually working for an engineer that knew my dad, and they all, so I was doing pretty well and on the path to that. But I was afraid to go to them and go, "This is what I want to do,"
Mhm.
and then finally, after watching Top Gun and then going, Mr. Schultz, Dr. Schultz goes, "Do it, John. This is." And I go tell my parents they were coming back from a trip when I told them, hey, and I had already signed up, right? I already took the oath.
Yeah.
6 months, I'm going to go. And I already took the initial physical. Now I got to get my flight physical. So late mid eight, like October of '86, is when I said, "Hey, this is what I'm doing, and I gotta go. I gotta be in Pensacola in February of '87 to start aviation officer candidate school." And they flipped out at first. And they're like, "You're throwing your education away." Blah blah. I go, "No, I'm trying to explain to them
Mhm.
what it meant, and that I had to have a college degree to go do this, right?" And and then I told my dad, I go, "Dad, this might even be a shot at the astronaut program."
Yeah.
And so they they understood right away, and but they were always afraid of that because my mom had told me when I was born, my grandfather who had just gotten out of prison, in Cuba, he said that boy right there, he's an American, and he's gonna have to fight for his country someday, and
Yeah.
he might even have to invade Cuba someday, but he is an American. And my mom, she said it, sent chills up her spine. And that stayed with her forever, that because she understood. I mean, she was involved in like hiding weapons from from my
Wow.
grandfather, Molotov cocktails, all this stuff as a
Yeah.
teenager, right? So
Wow.
she understood what this meant, right?
Mhm.
War, and revolution and stuff. And so um but the rest is history. They're super proud that but that's how I joined. That's how I got into the Navy.
That's awesome, man. Yeah. Well, let me back up real quick because I like to always ask veterans this question. So, growing up and just to kind of give a little bit of an advance notice, John has a book coming out and I've read some of it, so I kind of know a little bit more. But did faith play a role in all in your decision to join the military? Was it more based on kind of that childhood dream of a greater purpose, wanting to do more, and then obviously, I mean, come on, Top Gun. I mean, that's
Yeah,
a great movie.
right.
Who doesn't
But
want to
it
be
was
a
a great
naval
book.
aviator?
I don't know.
Yeah,
And the thing is, a lot of people won't admit it. I mean, they won't admit it. All the guys around me in that 1986,
yeah,
I'm sure into the 90s, you know, especially the group of folks that weren't in the academy or weren't
yeah,
our OTC, the guys that went to AOCS, right?
yeah.
And AOCS is that, famous officer and gentleman course. It doesn't
Mhm.
exist anymore.
Yep.
It was a pretty brutal course. I showed up with 64 dudes, and only by the end of the first week, it's hell week, poopy week, they called it because we were called poopies.
That's what we were
Uh,
called. We were called poopies
right,
also. First week, we were
right,
poopies.
first week, and we were down to 21. Now, granted, a
Wow.
lot of guys who showed up weren't, they were probably smart school, but they
Yeah.
weren't physically capable. There are some dudes who were studs coming out of sports, but they weren't smart enough to,
Mhm.
or study hard enough to
Yeah.
finish, the academic part of it. So, I mean, no, the first week we are down to 21. Now, all
Wow.
21 of us graduated. Out of those 21, I think 16 of us made it through flight school and went on to fly.
Wow. Well, they had a when I went to Pensacola for OCS, Officer Candidate School, and I remember seeing they had a like a guide on flag in a case, and it said ACE AOCS, and I was like, what is that? And then, but a lot of the procedures we did in the chow hall, they told us like that was carried over from that. And of course, I saw Officer and a Gentleman like in college, and my brother was already in the Marine Corps, so I kind of knew what to expect from the DIs, but the academics kicked my ass, dude. I mean, I had a degree in exercise science, so I was not going aviation, and I had friends that were sub-nuke guys, they're aviators and they're smoking all these tests. And I failed like a navigation test. I almost got kicked out because I couldn't make good enough grades. So I had to like really buckle down because I was like, dude, I'm just doing this to get commissioned. I'm not here to
Yeah.
I'm not here to
So
do anything.
the very first test we had, was like, history of the Navy,
Yeah.
tradition,
Yep.
it was an admin kind of test, right? That very first one. And
Hmm.
I flunked it.
Oh wow.
And I flunked it because I didn't study properly.
Yeah.
Up until then, I was, I found out then I wasn't the smartest guy in the room anymore. And I wasn't the best athlete around looking around either. I mean, because we had some world class athletes in my class,
Hmm.
a guy who was a professional soccer player, a guy who played football, at University of Florida,
Wow.
another guy who was an Olympic freaking bicyclist. So on top of that, we also had some freaking, literally rocket scientists
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
class too, right?
Yeah.
But that first one I flunked, and it was because I relied on not poor, I would say poor study habits, and I got through because I was pretty smart and
Mhm.
got to, but not this time around. And after that, I mean, I was like, shit. I already had my head shaved, right? You don't
Yep.
want to go home with your head shaved, right?
No.
That's what a lot of people say. Once you get your head shaved, you're committed,
Yep.
right? And, and I buckled down after that because I remember I got to second high when we got to the aerodynamics test. I got the second highest grade in the class, and
Nice.
some of the guys were looking at me. Hey, did because and also that first impression you give is what your reputation becomes.
Yeah.
So I was the dude that flunked the first easy test, right? And then
Yeah.
they thought I was the dumbass of the
Right.
class, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah.
but later, I did well, and like I said, I got the second highest grade on our aerodynamics test, which was a bitch of a
I
test.
can't even imagine,
And
dude.
the guy
Yeah.
who got the top grade was an aerospace engineer, and the DI gave him the nickname Geekster. He ended up being a backseater, I think, like in the A6. But and my nickname by my drill instructor was Godzilla because
Nice.
I had these bumps, the bumps on the back of your head,
Uh-huh.
after your head. He goes, you look like Godzilla, and that was done. That was it. Go Godzilla.
That's awesome.
DI gives you all these crazy names, right?
Yeah. So when you were going through that, the guys that didn't make it, did they have to go to the fleet as enlisted guys?
No, they had so. If you didn't make it, I think if you quit during AOCS in
Mhm.
class, and I can't remember, it was like up to the fourth week, or maybe it was the
Mm.
first week, you could go home,
Oh, wow, no
right?
kidding.
However, after a certain period, you had to go to the fleet.
Okay.
And at that point, I don't know if I can, man, it's so long ago. It's 30 something years ago. Well, I'm almost 40 now. Whether you had to go enlisted for a certain period, and I think if you were right near commissioning, you could get commissioned, but you'd have to go to the, we call it the black shoe navy,
Mm.
the surface navy, whereas
Yeah.
aviators were brown shoes, so referred
Right,
to it as the
right.
brown shoe navy. And during flight school, definitely, you're commissioned now, right?
Yeah,
You're an
yeah.
officer first and aviator second, right? If it didn't make it through flight school for whatever reason, some people got airsick, some people
Mhm.
eyes went bad. My eyes at that time, it was 2020,
Mhm.
and one of the reasons why I didn't go jets, my eyes went to 2035 at a time
Hmm.
when it wasn't. I have borderline jet grades
No
too,
kidding, wow.
and so I was like, I don't, I ended up going helos.
Hmm. So did you went API right after you commissioned? Do they
Well,
still do it that
API
way?
so API, which is I forgot, it's like aviation pre-indoc. I forgot what the
Yeah,
term means,
yeah.
but like people who go to the academy and ROTC, the Marines who go through OCS, they go through the API course, and that's where they do all that aviation and aerodynamics and
Mm.
weather and some PT, I guess, and water survival to start
Mhm.
flight school. But in AOCS, it was embedded in our program.
Oh, okay,
It
that
was
makes
part,
sense.
so we did
Okay,
all that stuff. We did the dunker. I
okay.
mean, our classes had, focus on aviation,
Mm,
aerodynamics, meteorology, engineering, that kind of stuff. So
okay.
it was embedded in AOCS.
That makes sense because in, Awesome Gentlemen, they did the dunker.
Yep.
We didn't do the dunker, so that makes sense. I didn't think of it that way because all the guys I was in with, they had to go to API, and my brother, he went OCS Marine Corps, so he went Pensacola for
Yep.
API and then primary. And funny
But
story real quick, 'cause you're
he probably also had to go through the basic
basic
course,
school.
right?
Yeah,
Where
he
you had to
did
become an
6
infantry
months.
officer,
Yep,
right?
yep. But,
And that was one of the other reasons one one of the other reasons why I went Navy, because the Marine recruiter and then the Navy aviation recruiter are both next to each other. I think the
mhm.
Marine was like a Harrier pilot or whatever,
Wow.
and the Navy guy's poking at him. He goes, "Tell him he's got to go to the basic course first." And he goes, "And if your eyes go bad during the basic course, you're not going to flight school."
Yeah,
And and that's 6 months out of your life. He goes, "If you go through AOCS, I guarantee you will be in flight school the
hmm,
day after you graduate."
yeah.
So that was one of the tipping, just kind of
Oh,
tipped
yeah, big
the
time.
decision to go Navy instead of Marine Corps.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned the Air Force and your grades because my brother went to the Air Force and he has an engineering degree, and they said, "We're not hiring." the Marine Corps was the only branch that would guarantee him flight school because he wanted jets. So he went Marines and he missed jets by like a percent. He got Cobras, which is badass, but he wanted
Yeah, I
jets.
mean,
He wanted
yeah,
jets, but yeah. So it's funny. It's cool hearing you talk and then and kind of like with Dave's story. And I went to his graduation when he got his wings and stuff. When I mean, I was in Pensacola for OCS, but it's cool to hear the difference between the training you went through versus how officer candidate school was because it was a little different. And so, for all you people watching this episode, if you're considering joining the military as an officer, be prepared because there's a lot of tests and a lot of academics when it comes to being an officer. I don't think that gets talked about a lot on podcasts. And John, I haven't had a lot of commission. I think you're the second commissioned officer I've had on here. So yeah, you don't hear people talk about that. I didn't because I got the OCS and I was like, oh shit, man, like this is this is no joke. Like the PT was a breeze, but I was like, man, I wasn't ready for
yeah,
this. You know?
yeah.
So but well, okay, so you get to so you get through that and then you end up so you go primary, I guess, after
So
graduation. Is that how that works?
yeah, I went to Corpus Christi,
Mm,
um,
okay.
Texas for
Yeah.
primary and intermediate, and then came back to Milton, Florida for helos. So, and I grew up Catholic,
Hmm.
um, a Catholic faith, and so while I was, again, I was a good kid. The trouble my brother and I used to get into, was daredevil shit.
Hmm.
Evil Knievel, trying, breaking shit left and right. I
Yeah.
mean, we didn't. I mean, I didn't get into drugs. I didn't drink. I mean, I had like my first beer when I was a senior in high school, right? So,
Hmm.
um, and I, so my wife kids at me because she's like, "Man, you're a big Catholic boy," right? And but we got into and girls. That was, if anything,
Yeah.
that was my other weakness was
Okay.
the girls, and I got in a lot of trouble there. Luckily, I didn't get shot by anybody's father, but so I met my wife in Corpus Christi. By the
Okay.
way, uh,
Nice.
we I was engaged at the time, kind of
Oh,
breaking up,
really?
but not really yet. And I met her in a country western bar on rock night, and I asked her to dance, and it turned into a whirlwind romance. She followed me to Milton, Florida, and we were
Nice.
we were secretly married 4 months
Wow.
into our relationship at the county courthouse in Milton, Florida.
Nice.
Uh,
Where's Milton at? Where is that?
Milton is just outside of Pensacola, a little bit further on like
Is
near I
that
10.
is that Whiting Field?
Yeah, Weidenfield is in Milton.
Okay, I
Or
know
yeah,
that. I know that
yeah.
area. Okay. I just didn't
So
recognize Milton, but I've seen
yeah,
Whiting Field. So okay.
yeah, and we were married 6 months later. As I was just, I mean, I actually got married over because during flight school you can't get a break for anything. It happened to be over Christmas break, so January 7th of that next year in '89, and then I got my wings in '89.
Nice.
But she grew up agnostic, and
Wow.
she got to give her creds. She went to a Catholic priest at, in her hometown, and she goes, "Look, I'm not Catholic, but we want to be married here. I
Mhm.
grew up here, and and we had to go to a preparation class in the Catholic faith for marriage, and and she did it right, and so she didn't fully convert afterwards because I mean spiritually we bounced around, and we tried to find something that will work for both of us. I mean, we even went to a Unitarian church at one point,
Wow.
and I'm like, this is a little too too broad, right? So we've always shared a strong sense of faith, even though we weren't like church going and
Mhm.
um, and many times we're moving around a lot. So, but yeah, when I had to mention that because I'm still blessed. I've been married twice, but to the same lady,
Nice.
and we've
Nice.
been together since 1988.
Well,
Uh,
I gotta ask you a question real quick, John. When you met Shelly at that country western barn, did you walk up to her and say, she's lost that love and feeling?
well, at that time, like a lot of the guys were like, "Hey, let's." Now,
I hate it when
I
she does that.
yeah, right. She she was wearing a sweater and jeans, and she was leaning up against a friend of hers, this taller, pretty lady. And I was with another friend of mine, and I'm Hispanic. My wife is of of Irish and I thought Danish descent, but it's actually Irish, British, and some French in there. Beautiful lady. And she said she noticed me and my buddy walk in, and she goes, "Man, that's the best looking Mexican I've ever seen." And later she explained that to me, and I'm like, "Look, I'm not Mexican, I'm Cuban." And she goes, "Oh man." And then the other thing she screwed up with was she goes, "My dad told me not to bring a boy home by the name of Juan." And I'm
Oh
like, and
no.
she knew me as John, and she goes,
Yeah.
and in her head, as she said it, she goes, "This guy's name is probably Juan, because it is. My name is Juan Alvarez." But no, I just asked her to dance and and then later sent her some flowers at work. She was an ICU nurse at the Catholic at the Catholic hospital there in Corpus.
I had to ask you that, man, because of Top
Yeah.
Gun. I mean, I had to do it. So, but
No, I mean, yeah, I mean, and that's the time when all those guys were doing that.
but
You would
yeah,
you'd wear your whites, and it was like, man, it
dude,
was like the
we did
ice
it.
cream.
I went to OCS in 2006, and we were still doing it. So I mean, it's like that never gets old, man. So you said you got helos. What aircraft did you get in the Navy?
So so you're in the Navy, you get a dedicated instructor up
Mm,
front who
okay.
usually beats snot out of you, right? And that instructor after that, when you start to fly with other instructors, his or hers, well, at that point it was um, his reputation's at stake as an instructor because how you
Right.
do with the other instructors goes back to him, right?
Hmm.
So my on wing in T-34s in the primary fixed wing uh, squadron in Corpus um, was a H-53 pilot.
Okay.
You know, super stallion. But the Navy also had the Sea Dragon version of it. Biggest, baddest helicopter. Chinooks can't touch those helicopters with 3-engine friggin' marine,
Hmm.
Sikorsky products as far as their lift and speed and everything. And it was a brand new helicopter. It was brand new in the Navy, and I got a ride in one, because they bring aircraft out, and I got a ride. I'm like, man, this thing's like it's like it's a Mack truck that drives like a Ferrari, and and I'm like I was hooked. And so when I went to and then in rotary wing when I was flying kilos,
Hmm.
my on wing there was a Marine 6'6" Marine who was
Wow.
a 46 driver, but also had some 53 time. So when it came time to graduate, I was near the top of my class, and I wanted to fly 53s. Well, actually, I asked for Hueys first. Hueys
Really?
because I knew the overseas Huey stations had A4s, and I had
Oh
some
wow.
buddies that actually got to fly the A4 jets while they were there, and
Oh,
two
that's
of them
cool.
actually transitioned to jets. And I'm like,
Wow.
hmm. And then so the detailer, which is the guy who does your assignment,
Hmm.
said, "No, you're not doing that.
Hmm.
Your grades are too good. You can have an H60. H60s were brand new too,
Hmm.
East or West Coast." And I'm like, "Well, how about 50?" Well, and then I said, "Well, what about 53s?" He said, "Well, right now we're not taking any nuggets, and nuggets are brand new because our wings were gold.
Yeah.
A nugget is referred to as a guy who just got their wings, right?" And because we're not sending nuggets to the FRS or back then it was called the RAG, the Replacement Air Group. Then they were called Fleet Replacement Squadrons. And that's where you learn the warfare part of the mission in your
Hmm.
aircraft. Because we're not sending any nuggets right now because they're transitioning from the older 53s and the squadrons are getting their experienced pilots transitioned. And I'm like, but sir, you know, you know, I got the top guy this week. You always tell they were always told if you're the top guy, you get your choice, right?
Hmm.
And he's like, shut up. And then he calls me back the next day. He goes, okay, you're going to Alameda, California, 53s. Don't you tell anybody you and I had this discussion because we're not supposed to be having this discussion. And so I lucked out, I was blessed and my wife was ecstatic. She's like, woohoo, Alameda, San
Yeah.
Francisco, Bay Area, blah, blah, blah. And we were the only active duty squadron there on the Pacific. We're the largest active duty squadron in the Pacific. Um, got there right after the earthquake, the big earthquake in '89. Where the bridge collapsed and the World Series was going on.
Giants
That's
and
why so
A's.
many
Yeah.
people didn't get injured during that
Yeah.
because everybody was at the World Series.
Hmm.
Oakland, the
Yep.
Bridge Series is what they called it.
Yeah.
Oakland versus uh, versus the
Giants.
Giants. And
Yeah.
I was
Hmm.
psyched to go out there. I'm a huge Miami Dolphins fan.
Hmm.
I used to, when I was a little kid, that's when they went undefeated.
Undefeated. Yeah.
We used to sing the Miami Dolphins song right after the Pledge of Allegiance every day in
Nice. Nice.
my fourth grade class. So,
That's awesome.
uh, but the uh, my other favorite team were the Raiders, and I'm going,
Okay.
yes, going to Oakland, get to see the Raiders, and the Oakland A's were big at that point too. But
Hmm.
the freaking Raiders moved to LA. So
Oh, that's
I
right.
never got to
Yeah, that's
watch a
right.
Raiders game in Oakland,
Oh, it
and
sucks.
experience the Raider
Yeah.
Nation. Uh, but I had a great tour. My wife got pregnant while we were there. We got our first child. She was born right at the beginning of the first, preparation for the first Gulf War. Went out, turned around, came back. My skipper said, "Nah, you don't, West Corona was big enough." So I went to Bahrain, came right back because the war was not kicked off yet. Our guys ended up deploying later to help minesweeping operations on the
Mm.
USS Tripoli and helping the Marine Corps. Sadly enough, well, my first experience with death in the military was for flight students. Prior to that, in Corpus Christi, we went out and rented an airplane and went dorking around, and they all died. Crashed. I remember going to that memorial, and then
Man.
I remember then right as we were on one of the beer functions after one of the wingings, and one of the instructor pilots said, look around. There's like 8 of us standing there. One of you guys is not going to be around here in 10 years.
Damn.
Somebody here is going to, so keep that in mind. And you got to, keep that in the back of your mind that, that loss is part of service.
Hmm.
And sure enough, we lost an aircraft in the first Gulf War. And Craig Valentine, who's the co-pilot, Tom Larson was a pilot. We had 8 guys on that aircraft. Hurricane 15 or 16, I think was the call sign. And I get called. I was working on maintenance on the aircraft, doing a maintenance flight on a Saturday. On the radio says all hurricane aircraft return, land. My skipper points at me. He goes, "Hey, you are Craig Valentine's Keiko." I'm like, "It's a Keiko." One of the senior officers gives me a little, "Shut up, John." My call sign was Frito, by the way. I was
That's
the only
right. Yeah.
Hispanic in the wardroom, so it was Frito Bandito. And he goes, "Frito, you're Valentine's Keiko, and casualty affairs coordination officer." I learned a lot
Ooh.
about what that entails. And usually in other services, there's a person, an admin person that takes care of that, an
Yeah.
officer or
Yeah.
whatever. But in the Navy and the Marine Corps, you just don't have enough people, right? You have 6 different jobs.
Hmm.
And I had to learn overnight what it meant to be, and not only that, for one of my buds, one of my bros.
Yeah.
And one of the most difficult things I had to do, I was one of his pallbearers.
Man.
Um, carried that, still carried for life. We still send flowers to his, Memorial Day. We send, there's a couple guys that I've lost along the way. My wife and I send flowers every year. God bless my wife because she's the one who remembers that we got to, we got to get the flowers
Yeah.
to their grave sites every year. First one was for Craig Valentine,
Man.
and that's why I'm saying his name because of this weekend.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, John, where was your faith at this point? You're newly
So,
commissioned. You
so
go
this,
through all of this. Like.
so our daughter was born
Hmm.
1991. We flew back to Miami to get her baptized in the church that I wasn't. I was baptized in a different church, but the church that I grew up in,
Hmm.
where I had my first communion, where I had my catechism, where I got confirmed, the Immaculate Conception Church in Hialeah, Florida. And so, we brought my daughter home to get her baptized, and Shelly again was, you know, trying to take classes to convert to Catholicism. But then we go back to California and we're like trying to find, a spiritual home. We went to the Base Chapel every once in a
Hmm.
while. That's where we like, we went to this Unitarian church for a while. It was open and, very inviting and not very dogmatic,
Hmm.
because again, as a Catholic, you grew up with a lot of guilt. But I got polygraph. I remember I had to go through a polygraph for, my security clearance once. The interrogator, I guess, the guy who does it, he goes, Catholics, he told me later afterwards, he goes, Catholics are the easiest people to polygraph. I go, why? He goes, because you guys live off guilt, right? As opposed to shame. you guys live off guilt. He goes, I can nail you guys, and get you, you're the easiest one's to polygraph. So I passed, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
the good thing is I passed the polygraph, but so that's how we were spiritually. I can't say that we were, so we were kind of, looking and experimenting with what we were going, and again, in my heart, every night, every morning, I would say Lord's Prayer. I
Hmm.
would say Hail, because as a kid, you get in trouble. You got to say so many Hail Marys. So
Yeah.
that's ingrained in your memory, right? I'm like,
Right.
I fall back on that. My mom later in life, she had a esoteric bookstore, and they had all kinds of stuff there. And but she was also known as the Angel Lady, that because she sold like angels and stuff and Christmas stuff to the local archdiocese. Even though on the other side she had crystals and all this other fairy stuff on the other side of the bookstore. Um, so my parents, and that was something my dad and my mom said. Look, when I was a kid, it was always pray, pray for
Yeah.
everything you need. Miracles happen.
Hmm.
My father had a more pragmatic, more I'd say stoic. My dad was a philosopher. I mean, my first Marcus Aurelius quote was from my dad in
Wow.
Spanish,
No
right?
kidding.
And I have one of his books from like the '60s, which was because back then Stoicism was more of a philosophical, academic kind of thing. And I still have that book from my dad. It was like from 1968, and it's a compendium of different Stoic philosophers. But same thing. And my dad, once I was 18 and getting ready to go to school, and he said, importance of prayer, but it also focus, channel your, control. As a kid playing sports, he's the one who taught me how to breathe properly,
Yeah.
before working out. He goes, before you go out on the field, take that big breath and go, and then go. Right. So he he he's the one who taught me and my brother. My brother, I have a brother who's a year and 2 days younger than me, and then I have a sister who's 4 years younger than me, and then another brother that's 7. Out of all of us, our sister was the best athlete. She of all the 5'2", and she played college volleyball and almost played professional volleyball. Was a triathlete, all this stuff. And my youngest brother
Nice.
went to state wrestling and played football and wrestling and stuff. But we were all good athletes.
Hmm.
But that was something my dad ingrained in us is like visualization before it was a thing.
Right.
Sit
Right.
down and swing at the ball with your head, with your eyes closed, and you will hit better. All that's years, decades later, you hear about all this stuff, and I'm like, my dad used to tell us this stuff. He started with like betting my brother and I that we couldn't sit still for like 30 seconds. And it was started with like a quarter bet. He goes, "All right, let's
Yeah.
do a minute," and to relax. And the same thing when we used to go scuba diving so we can hold our breath underwater.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, that was so prophetic and so, ahead of its time
No
before it all
kidding.
became popular.
Yeah.
And my dad is a very scholarly, but he was always an avid runner. He ran well into his late 70s. And I remember we were at a church softball game years later. My dad, he's in his 60s, and he freaking smacks the ball. And he hasn't played ball in God knows how long. And people are looking at him like, the scholarly old man. He goes, physics. That's what he said to them, physics. And he just ran around the bases.
Awesome, man. That's
So,
awesome.
so when we were 18, my dad said, look, we gave you a solid base.
Hmm.
People need to believe in something. And he goes, because he had mentioned, he goes, you look around, you see these young people who are looking for stuff and they get into like all kinds of crazy stuff. It's because he didn't have a base, a
Right.
solid base as children. And no fault of theirs. He said many times it's no fault of theirs, right? They don't, because we gave you a solid base. What you decide to do spiritually is now yours. But you have a solid base of faith. And
That's
that's, I remember he said they felt like it was a gift to us.
that's really good parenting to put it that way. Cause a lot of us, at least in the South, grow up with church hurt in a legalistic environment. I'm a product of that. And so there's a lot of men that are kind of, I think, trying to rediscover their faith or relationship with Christ because they grew up and just felt like they couldn't hold the standard. They couldn't make a mistake and it turned them away from God. But It's really cool that you shared that, John, because I've not heard that before, and I like how your father put that. That's a really a healthy way to kind of look at spirituality, I think, in general.
Yep. And
That's
granted,
amazing.
I mean, you know, and I mean, in the, it's in the book there. I struggled with those, and I tried to, and the other thing my parents taught us was to respect other cultures, respect other
Hmm.
beliefs, right? So, the notion of reincarnation or the notion of karma and all that, I
Hmm.
did play with that. I'm not, even though my faith is Christian, I was like, does it exist? Did it?
Hmm.
And I struggled with that, but it took this crash to kind of,
Yeah.
we use the term in aviation to recage me.
Hmm.
When you recage your instruments is when your instruments are getting all kind of fuzzy
Hmm.
and you hit a button and it's your attitude indicator now is solid.
Yeah.
It took this to recage me spiritually.
Well, let's kind of let's go that direction. So, can you tell our audience how you went from being a naval aviator and then going into Air Force Special Operations, and we can kind of get into where your story really takes off with what you were just talking about with faith and the crash.
Yep. So, 1992, my wife was pregnant with our second daughter. Right after the Gulf War, and the in the Navy, the next progression is to go to your shore duty.
Hmm.
And in aviation, if you go to the fleet replacement squadron as a flight instructor, I was a NATOPS instructor there at the squadron. You go to the FRSs, and that's probably one of the top jobs you should be doing, right? Because now you are an instructor for the rest of the fleet. You work tactics and everything else for your warfare community. And that's where my skipper wanted me to go. And I thought, that's where I wanted to go until I met with one of the Sikorsky test pilots. And he goes, apply to test pilot school, but
Hmm.
or go to grad school, go to
Hmm.
Naval Postgraduate School. I'm in Alameda and Monterey, California is where Naval Postgraduate School was. And I go, shit, my wife's pregnant with our second daughter. There's no way I'm going to have time to do a master's degree at night. And so I'm like, I'm applying to test pilot school, or I mean, excuse me, uh, to Naval Postgraduate School for engineering. Uh, and I got in and to aeronautical engineering. At first, it was space systems engineering. I'm like, look, I'm not an electrical engineer. I'm not that smart. And so I went to the aeronautical engineering department, and I was going to apply to test pilot school.
Nice.
And no, and I'm like, you walk into that building and all the Marine and Navy hero freaking astronauts from the Mercury program are all on this wall as you walk in, and you go, man, these are the same rooms these guys studied in, right? Maybe I do have a shot at this, right?
Yeah.
And then again, I realized very quickly that I wasn't the smartest guy in my class either. Again, right? Just because we had some real rocket
I
scientists in that
bet.
class.
I
We had two
bet.
instructors, one of the first lady jet pilots in the Navy, who was already a test pilot instructor waiting to go through. Uh, and only one of the guys in our class didn't make it to become an astronaut. His last name was Poindexter. Ended up becoming a shuttle pilot. He was an F-14 guy, and his dad was the Admiral Poindexter that was working for the Reagan administration. But so I was applying to test pilot school. My grades were okay, and I'm like, I got a good shot at it. And then there was this exchange program with special ops. So I was doing research on night mine warfare, night systems in the 53. And my former skipper, my squadron commander, was now wing commander of our tactical fleet. And he said, "You need to apply to this, John. You're the guy who needs to go to this and come back." So I applied my second application to test pilot school. Uh, so that was 94 by that time. My second daughter was born in 92
Okay.
while I was at grad school. And that's when I was like, I think I'm good enough with a B so I can spend more time with my kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
My girls were little. That's when we started doing our Jimmy Buffett dances. They became my little backup singers for the Cheeseburger in Paradise song and Volcano. In fact, I couldn't work out as much because and my wife was working at nights at the local hospital. So I was at home with the kids while I was, getting paid by the Navy to go get my graduate degree. And so I didn't study as hard as I could have.
Yeah.
But I really don't feel guilty at all about that because I was able to spend some quality time on my two
That's
girls,
that's
when they were
awesome. Yeah.
2 and 1 year old. And, and it's funny because I also couldn't get to the gym all the time. So I used to carry them around in my arms and we used to dance to like, the cartoon classic melody stuff, and
Mhm.
I literally curl my kids, right?
Nice.
And run around with them. And I'm like,
Yeah,
yeah, get a workout here with these two little girls as they get older. They're getting heavier, but it wasn't
that's
as
awesome.
bad.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So that's so I applied to this exchange program, and now I'm the Navy exchange pilot in Air Force Special Operations Command, assigned to fly Pavlos,
Nice.
20th Special Operations Squadron, you know, which were highlighted in the Tom Clancy novel,
Mhm,
Clear and Present Danger.
mhm.
And, we used to fight with the 160th guys. Well, the Air Force was going to give up helos, but, this is true. And you can go back and argue with your dad about this, but the, uh, the 20th SOS and the Pavlos were still kept on by the Air Force, by Congress, because they felt that the Army 160th was not ready yet. And if you look at, the helicopter special ops stuff, well, going all the way back to Vietnam, even
Mhm.
back to Burma, because the Army Air Corps, at that point when it was the Air Force, the air commandos were in existence all the way back to the Flying Tigers in Burma. The first helicopter rescue was done in Burma by air commandos, and then
Huh.
in during Vietnam, there were Air Force Special Operations helicopter squadrons and
Okay.
Navy. The
Yeah.
the the Navy had two special ops dedicated units, the HAL squadrons or HAL squadrons, the Sea Wolves, where the
Oh, I remember
Army
that.
had
Yeah.
the Army and granted, look, the Army had a bunch of young guys, right out of high school flying
Mhm.
brand new helicopters and assault missions for all, heroic kind of stuff, right? You talk to all the even the jet pilots in Vietnam, and they're like, man, being a Huey pilot, you know, was was the shit back then.
Yeah, yeah.
But there's a long history in the Air Force, believe it or not, of special operations helicopters long before the 160th,
Mhm.
could do any of this stuff. The Air Force was already doing it.
Yeah,
Now, granted, the big thing is that you go in the 160th, you stay there for life. You have a
yeah.
40-something-year-old warrant officer who's done nothing but fly since he was 20, as
Mhm.
opposed to an officer, that does a tour, like
Yep.
me, and goes to Naval Postgraduate School. I get to fly on the side, but I'm not, honing those skills every day, every night for the next 30 years. And
Yeah.
that's where the secret sauce of the 160th is. Those guys stayed in that unit and truly become the best friggin' helo pilots in the world. So props to them. But I
Yeah.
also had to poke at them a little bit because
Yeah.
any of the Air Force guys or Navy guys could have made it through that program.
You gotta love it, man. I love the
Yeah,
inter-service rivalry. I
yeah.
love it.
No, and I love
Yeah.
them. Man, I mean,
Well,
God
it's
bless them.
funny. It's funny you say that, John, because my brothers made the comment that if the Marine Corps had that unit, it would be even better. He's said that, for what the stuff he's done, but,
Well,
obviously they
and
they
and
don't.
it came down to funding too, right?
Yeah, totally.
A, a Marine Cobra unit gets to shoot so many rockets a year.
Mhm. Yeah,
Whatever they shoot in a year, the friggin' 160th shoots in a month.
yeah, yeah.
So, and again, some of it had to do with inter-service rivalry. But here we go from the beginning, from the when the 160 stood up,
Mhm.
and General Steiner, who was one of the first SOCOM commanders,
Yep.
made sure that the Marines would always have an exchange pilot
Mm.
in special ops. So there was always a Cobra guy or a Huey guy that would go to the 160th.
Yeah.
And in Pavlo, we had a Marine Exchange 53 pilot.
Okay,
I was the
nice.
first. I was the first Navy exchange pilot, and I don't know if the Navy and the Army were ever talking about an exchange, but I know one of the H-60 Navy pilots ended up going to Air Force Rescue as an exchange.
Yeah, there's a couple Navy guys that I know
Right?
of that went 160. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. Yeah, that's cool, and I know, like, I read a book in high school, and it was called The Commandos, and they talked about you guys in the very beginning of the book, the Pavlo guys, and I mean, that's a cool helicopter. I remember, like, because 'cause we'd go to Florida as kids, like, go to the beach, and you'd see them, and you're just like, man, that thing is awesome because it's so big and it's just intimidating. And I forgot till I had PJ on the show. I forgot the Osprey replaced them because
Yep.
I'd still go to the beach like, man, where are all Pablos at? And I forgot that Osprey
Yeah.
came on the scene.
Yeah. A lot
But
of the guys transitioned to the Osprey.
yeah, yeah.
Right.
So what was that like, man, going from, you're in the Navy, now you're going over to special operations in the Air Force. Was there like a really rough hazing period with that? Like how did they
So
accept you?
they already had a Marine, right? And they already been
Mhm.
hazing the Marine. In the Air Force, the air crewmen, the guys in the back, the gunners and the
Yeah.
flight engineers, um, that's their job. Whereas in the Navy and in the Army, the crew chiefs or the guys in the back were also maintenance guys, and they
Yeah.
had to work on the aircraft. So our back enders in the Air Force were professional aviators, right? Our flight engineers were some of the smartest guys on the friggin' planet. Our gunners are a little different, somewhat knuckle draggers, but that's what we need in the back
Right.
when you wouldn't need to manhandle a Navy SEAL who wants to jump out of the aircraft, and you literally got to pull them back in, right?
Yeah.
So we got some characters, especially on the gunner side of our Pavlo Brotherhood, right?
Mhm.
And it's the same, I'm sure, in the 160th, and the same in the Marine Corps. I watched the videos of 53 guys, and they're backseaters and gunners doing all kinds of crazy
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's pretty cool.
Okay.
I had to know that when to give a little bit more. As a pilot, you did your own pre-flight. Flight engineers doing a pre-flight, trust them 100%.
Mhm.
In the cockpit, stuff that I used to do on my own, speed control levers, which the Air Force calls throttles, and that's another screwed up thing. Um, the flight engineers would do that. They would, and that was because going back to the days where they had the goggles that, you know, with the old night vision goggles that you couldn't see anything outside. You
Yeah.
had to have an extra set of hands. And I think the flight engineer goes all the way back to Vietnam. They had them in H3s. They had them in the 53s that had flew in Vietnam. So I'm having that extra set of eyes and hands and a brain in the cockpit really helps when things could get pretty squirrely at night and in bad weather.
What about going from, a different aircraft? Was that
Well,
challenging?
so I already had 1,000 hours in the 53,
Okay.
right,
Okay.
in a monster aircraft. Now,
Yeah.
but the 53 that I flew had a lot more power than the 53 I flew in the
Oh, okay.
Pavlo. Pavlo was a 2-engine earlier version that was been converted. I'd been flying a 3-engine monster aircraft. So
Mm.
everything felt the same. The cockpit,
Mhm.
the seat, everywhere, everything was, except for, and that's where you had to be really, really careful. You didn't have the power that you had in the previous aircraft. And you could get yourself in a lot of trouble. And so I always kept that in the back of my mind. The engineers would remind me, hey, sir, remember, this is not an Echo, the E
Mhm.
model, 53. Um, Luckily, I don't know how many close calls we've had in the, and I'm sure you hear the stories from your dad and your brother every night. Sometimes some of the most hairiest stuff you've done was not in combat; it was
Yeah.
in training. So, um, it actually it wasn't too bad of a transition for me because I already had a bunch of hours in
Okay.
a big combat aircraft like that. So,
That
so
makes
because
sense.
many of the Air Force pilots had come from the Hueys, had a
Oh, okay.
thousand hours in the Hueys. Not too many came from H-60s because the H-60s had their own combat line and they had, rescue. They were short pilots and they had
Mm.
to keep going. So
Okay. What about like, in-air refueling? Were you doing that in the Navy or was that not
yeah,
till you got to the Air Force? Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
did it without night vision goggles.
Wow.
And that was some of the kidding back and forth because there's a little light up front, a white light that
Okay.
lights up the drogue.
Yeah.
And I was a refueling instructor. That was a
Oh,
specialty. Now we
nice.
didn't do it as often as the Air Force did,
Mhm.
and the Marines didn't do it as often as the Air Force did. The Air Force guys would night air refueling every friggin' day because
Mhm.
the C-130s are right there with them.
True. Yeah.
But it is. I mean, air refuel. I'm not. Air refueling is a very delicate and very small room for error
Mhm.
because you can either chop the hose or you could chop your frig. I don't know if you've seen the videos of the friggin' probe literally
Yep.
coming off the aircraft, right?
Yep.
So it can, and especially in turbulence, it can be very hairy.
Yeah, I can imagine. My brother shared a story where, they had issues and could not refuel, and he was basically flying for 12 hours, and they were told, "We'll just land the aircraft." And where he was at, he was like, "I'm not landing
Right
here."
in the
And
aircraft. Yeah.
they finally got it to work, but he was kind of, and he told it in a very PG way, but I was just like, "Damn, bro." And this has been pretty recent. So there was some hairy shit going on, but
Yeah. No,
and his wife
that's,
she's like, "What? I didn't know that story."
yeah.
And I was
Yeah.
like,
My,
but
yeah, my hairiest story was this was during Bosnia before the Kosovo War. And I was the co-pilot. I was a brand new Navy guy, and I was flying with an Air Force, guy who was in the right seat. And we were diverted because there was something going on the ground. And F-16 was coming over to do a show of force thing, and we were supposed to be on standby in case something happened to pick people up, or if the F-16 guy had to punch out or whatever.
yeah.
And we're in the valley, Syria was used to be these valley runs, and the weather was bad, and we were like out of fuel. And the tanker, usually there's a procedure you go through to rejoin the tanker. The tanker's just like, just turn your tack in. And we were right above the clouds. We're like at 10,000 feet right above the clouds on fumes. And the tanker just comes up out of the clouds right ahead of us.
Oh.
And the pilot's trying to get in to plug, and I'm in the left seat. So it's a little more difficult because you're on the left side of the airplane away from it. And he couldn't get on. And I go, let me give it a shot. And flight engineer's like, let him give it a shot. This guy's done this for a while. It's not like I'm a brand new co-pilot.
Mm-hmm.
And boom, I got right in there.
Mm.
And then they starts to turn, but we're such a high altitude, we couldn't maintain. And we're like, I remember saying, hey,
Jeez.
guys are pulling a buttload of collective. I've never felt
Yeah.
the collective hit the stop of the aircraft.
Wow.
My flight engineer after that said, exactly how much is a buttload of collective, sir? So that became a joke. Luckily we were able to get the fuel, and we descended back down just above the clouds. We didn't get in the clouds, got our fuel, and then, we on station. Nothing ever happened during that thing. It was like some weapon stash that some warlord had to turn over to an army unit.
Mm.
And then if there was going to be a firefight. Nothing happened though. But yeah, that was an air refueling story that we're like, whoa.
Yeah.
So
Well, let's you want to get into Ecuador?
yeah. Okay. So yes. So uh, uh, while I was at the 20th, deployed and this was 1996. I got to the 20th at around December of 95. And the only thing that was going on during that period was Bosnia. A French fighter got shot down in Mirage. Our guys went after him. Ebro 33. Scott Grady got shot
Yeah,
down.
yeah, I remember that.
And the Marines snaked that mission because our guys were supposed to fly it. They flew in, and our guys were like the backup to the Marines that got in. The
Mm.
Marines did some incredible flying to get him out. So that was going on, and we also evacuated the embassy in Liberia. We used to call it the evacuation season because of all the wars that were going on in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And Ron Brown was the Secretary of Commerce for Clinton at the time, and his plane crashed in Croatia. We had to go in initially for a rescue, and then it would turn into a body recovery. So a bunch of stuff going on in that period. But because I spoke Spanish, and I was an instructor, ETOPS instructor prior, I got recruited to this new squadron that had just been stood up again. And it's the 6th Special Operations Squadron. Before that, it had been a classified detachment. And this concept of what they call a combat aviation advisor, General Steiner, one of the first SOCOM commanders, referred to that unit or that capability as special forces with wings. So the units were A teams, just
Mm-hmm.
like a special forces team, but it
Mm-hmm.
was an operational aviation detachment, OAD, as opposed to an ODA,
ODA. Yeah.
right? And we would organize the same way. The 12, 13 man team is, first of all, psychologically, it's the right size of a team.
Mm-hmm.
Platoons, direct.
Mm-hmm.
So that's about the right size. So we could tailor those teams to be rotary wing. They could be fixed wing. They could be air-based ground defense. They could be security forces. They could be like in our case, the deployment that I was about to go on, it was an air liaison type of team where we had helos, helo crew, maintenance guy, and combat controller, or air controller, pararescue. And so I was being recruited to go with them to Ecuador.
Mm-hmm.
And in that period, too, I don't know if you heard the term JSET, Joint
Mm-hmm.
Combined Exercise for Training. There was special funding for this is how special operations forces would go, especially in Latin America, to train other countries.
Mm-hmm.
With the caveat, you're not there to train the other country. That's secondary. You're there to train yourself on how to be a better trainer.
Mm.
Now, in true special operations fashion, units abuse that. But the laws were very strict that you're not there, for example, to give a new capability to it because that's security assistance. And because of what happened in the 80s with the Contras and all the advising stuff, there were very strict laws. So in 95, 96, the first set of actual counter drug, counter narcotics funded missions for special operations forces came into effect. Now you can actually train and deliver a new capability to the host nation that you're working with. So Ecuador had, in that region we deployed to, had a long history of counterinsurgency, counter narcotics, um, illegal exploitation of minerals and oil. That's an oil exploratory area. And to this day, it's a hotbed. It's called the Sucumbios region in the north eastern portion of Ecuador along the border of Colombia. The Putumayo River is the northeastern border with Colombia, and it's and it goes into the Amazon. So bottom line, make long story short, we were there deployed with a joint special operations task force made up of air commandos to do the helo training and the air to ground training for their attack helicopters in a riverine jungle environment. And we were there with a platoon from SEAL Team 4 and a detachment from Special Boat Unit 26, which were the small boat teams in Panama back then.
Okay.
The bases in Panama were still active or getting ready to close down. These are the guys who are the predecessors to the current day combat crewmen.
Swigs.
Right?
Yeah.
The Swigs.
Yeah.
Because back then it wasn't a career field.
Right.
Sometimes there were Navy SEALs in there. There are other sailors that so their background goes back all the way to the river rats,
Mm-hmm.
Of Vietnam, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a detachment of those guys. On the other side, we also had another A team up in the capital of Quito, which was the fixed wing C-130 training side. They would teach them how to do air bundles, air drops, and so we deployed to Ecuador on an MC-130P Shadow special ops aircraft from the 9th SOS that was attached to the mission.
Where was the 9th based out of?
The 9th at the time was based out of Eglin Air Force Base.
Okay. Okay.
And Hurlburt was technically part of the Eglin range, just on the western side.
Gotcha.
Right? We're on the southern side of the base.
It's a good duty station.
Yes. So my wife drove me to Eglin to get on their plane twice because we had to turn around at one point. We went to Panama, and then our deployment orders, the restrictions of these missions, the deployment orders had to be signed by the Secretary of Defense at the time.
Oh, that's right. I remember reading about this.
Because and you had to be back by the end of the fiscal year.
Mm.
So September 30th, you had to be out of the country. And again, because of the laws, the left and right boundaries that Congress put into control, so these missions wouldn't go haywire and, end up going rogue and becoming warlords in another country.
Yeah.
And so that's what was the mission. The mission was to help the Ecuadorians in their riverine combined operations because their joint operations, the Army wouldn't speak to their Navy wouldn't, speak to their Air Force. The Air Force looked down on everybody, different radios, different procedures. And so we were there to teach them how to do air to ground liaison work in the riverine environment to infill and exfil people out of the river. And on the ground side or on the water side, our SEALs were going to train their naval infantry, their version of or Marines, really,
mm-hmm.
and their Coast Guard, which had a special ops kind of unit, which is more law enforcement, but coastal law enforcement. When I say coastal, let me rephrase that, riverine, because that whole area is basically rivers, and the border with Colombia is one big river. And so back in 95, 94, even, there were the FARC had basically murdered some of the officers of the Coast Guard. In 95, we had some American oil exploration folks that were taken hostage. Our national forces, our elite forces were on call to rescue them, but they were, their release was negotiated. 6 months prior to our deployment, well, maybe more, like it was a year before. So it was like 8 months prior to our deployment, a special forces team got into a firefight. Now they don't know if they were FARC or just, you know, just bad guys that hijacked a bus,
Yeah.
right? And but they got into a firefight, because back then there were rules about whether you can even carry your weapon, as an advisor. So that changed policy, that we had to be able to defend ourselves and whatnot. So we flew down on the C-130 to another base called Lago Agria, which means bitter lake, literally. And we trucked about 3 hours through the jungle to a town called San Francisco de Orellano. Puerto, and Puerto means port, because again, it's all riverine stuff.
Riverine,
So
yeah.
this dude Oriano was a badass conquistador in the 1500s that sailed and pillaged and raped his way all the way through the Amazon. They're
Wow.
the first European to actually navigate the whole from coast to coast across the continent in the Amazon. So famous dude. He's got a patch over his eye. He looks like a pirate conquistador, the classic pirate conquistador that you would think of. And, my ancestors, Spanish descent,
Mm,
right? That's
yeah.
good. I used to tell my son, I go, when I thought my wife was part Danish, I go, you're the descendant of conquistadors and Vikings. So on a lacrosse field, act like it, right?
Nice. That's awesome.
So,
Well,
so we, so this was, we went down first to Panama to train up with the SEALs in August. We turned around, came back and redeployed in early September.
can I
Um,
ask you a question real
yeah,
quick before you
yeah.
keep going? I got two questions. How did Shelly feel about you transitioning into the special operations community? And then can you kind of share how she felt about you going to Ecuador because of everything was going on? And I have a sneak peek because I've read some of the
Yeah,
book.
yeah, you're right.
And I don't want to give it away
Yeah.
because I want people to go buy the book, but
So,
I'd like to kind of hear her thoughts on you transitioning from the Navy into a special operations community.
all right. So Shelly's father was a firefighter,
Okay.
right? And he had a close call when she was a little girl. Was trapped. Floor collapsed on him. What saved him was that he dove under a couch, and the couch had been flipped over, and that's what saved him from being crushed by the floor that collapsed over him. And his dudes had to come in and save him, and put a hose in there so he could breathe, and they got him out. Some injuries, but she remembers that as a child, right? So, but she understands service and guys
Hmm.
in uniform, right? Her uncle served in the Canadian Army. She was Canadian. By the way, she was Canadian.
Okay.
She was
Okay.
from Hamilton, Ontario.
That's right.
Although
Okay.
her ancestors were from Massachusetts, and her family goes back to the days of she could be a daughter of the Revolution technically, because her ancestors actually come from Massachusetts and Boston. Some of the first immigrants from Europe.
Very cool.
Um, so anyway, so she understood my service. And it's funny, when I first met her, I go, look, I'm just going to do my 8 years, do my duty, and I'm going to go out and go to the airlines or something.
Hmm.
She's always like, hey, every time we got a new assignment, so, when she was pregnant with Nicole, I get the assignment to Naval Postgraduate School, and with aspirations of maybe going to test pilot school and
Yeah.
becoming an astronaut. She knew that was my love, right? You know,
Yeah.
now aviation's my thing, and she's a nurse. She always wanted to be a nurse. And so she understood that calling, that your job is your calling, not necessarily your job that you just go to and get paid for, right?
Right.
So and she knew I was like disappointed and also kind of like on this cusp about not being able to go become an astronaut, because now I'm not going to be a test pilot. But I think she also was relieved, because there is dangers in that, right?
But yeah.
And then she goes, well, shit, special operations. But we knew that we were going to end up in Florida, closer to both our families. Her family's up the East Coast, my family's down South Florida. So she's like, okay, well, and I never really got into that discussion with how she actually felt about me going to special ops in the first place. But I know, I mean, and like you said in the book, she did not have a good feeling in her gut about me going on this deployment with the 6th Special Ops Squadron. Later, she used to kid around with me, because I actually, after all the ordeal, I went back to the 6th SOS twice. I went back
Mm.
as a major, which is called the assistant director of operations. And then I went back as the XO, the director of operations. I'm sorry, I'm using Navy term there, and the commander. And she used to refer to the sixth as the 666 squadron. She goes,
Wow.
they almost killed you. I don't want you to go back there. Right. So, but on this trip, she really had a bad feeling in her gut, and she was afraid to tell me.
Right.
She didn't want to jinx me either, right? But she kids around about, hey, I could break your finger and you won't have to go.
Yeah.
And that's in the book, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was like, Shelly, stop it already.
Right.
She's driving me to Edlin. She in this book also lays out a bunch of her fears and her demons that she had to deal with me flying, and the fears and and what she explains is her despair was the lack of control
Yeah.
and the feeling of helplessness, because we tried to make decisions together a lot, but there are some decisions, when the Navy or the Air Force or the Army or the Marine Corps tell you, here's where you're going,
Hmm.
right? You're going, right?
Yeah. You're going. Yeah.
And there is no ifs, ands, or buts.
Hmm.
And that's when she first, I think it hit her in the face that, oh shit, I don't think he should be there, first of all. And second, I can't do anything about it.
What do you think that was? Like, do you think that was the Holy Spirit talking to her saying,
Maybe, because she's a nurse and she was an ICU nurse. She's dealt
yeah,
with death. She's
yeah,
had people die on her hands. She's saved lives prior to that. I tell people she was a badass ICU nurse when I met her.
hmm,
And she said, no, I don't. I care for people. I go, Shelly, but you had to be able to compartmentalize
yeah,
all that stuff. Right. And so, she's seen humanity. She's prayed with people, and their families as
hmm,
people were passing away. So, maybe, that's what she's, you know, she had that premonition,
hmm,
spirit was talking to her that this isn't, this is not where your husband should be right now.
yeah,
And so that was the point. And she was on edge the whole time. I called her from this, like, what's it called? A jungle exploration hotel that was outside the base on a payphone, because there were no cell phones. There were
right,
cell
right,
phone bags back
yeah,
then, with a big giant battery.
yeah.
But I used a calling card or whatever, call direct, and she really was um, taken back. She couldn't talk to me. She handed the phone to the girls. Here,
That's right. Yeah,
talk to
that's
your
right.
dad. And because I told her, and quite frankly, Steve, when we got into we landed in Lago Agria, ramp opens, heat and the humidity hits you. I've been there before, right? In different places
Hmm.
in Africa. I mean, I'm shot at in different places, but
Yeah.
here it was different. And my angst when I got there, from the moment I got there, going through the jungle, my daughter goes, she was using the word, maybe it was a past life. I'm like, no, I struggled with that. I think it was like what I call generational guilt, you know, because I was, in knowing what was going on with the villagers and all this stuff, my ancestors raped and pillaged their way through Latin America, right? And was I inheriting some of that? So I was like, okay, we're here to do some good. Hopefully, keep the, insurgents at bay, because even though we're there to do counter drug operations, the Ecuadorians were sure as shit going to use that for counterinsurgency. The skills that we were giving them,
Hmm.
and we knew that because they were going to take down a drug lab, which was a FARC camp, and that's what we were training them to head, to finally end up doing.
Hmm.
So we both had some type of, premonition, gut feeling that things weren't right from the get go.
And from what I remember, you described it like you really felt it before that mission when you were sitting. It was it pre-flight or when you were in the cockpit and you got that
So
pain in your chest?
yeah, yeah. So the day of my crash, get to the day of my crash. So I was the most fluent speaker of anybody on the team, except for me. There were two Puerto Rican guys who could speak really well. But I mean, of the pilots, myself and the pilot, and even our combat controller who lied about his Spanish capabilities. So I had to brief all the 9-line training and all that. I had to brief it because his Spanish was not there. So that morning, Mike Hargis, who was the other pilot, he was going to take both sorties. It was a morning sortie and a late morning sortie. And he came back, and I really, I can't remember what the reason was. He goes, "Hey, Johnny, can you take the next flight?" I'm like, "Sure." I was playing basketball with the Ecuadorians. I run back, to my hooch, and I was wearing a T-shirt that I swapped out with the pilot. You swap gear and
Mhm.
your patches and stuff. We're in the jungle, but we'd swap T-shirts. So I was wearing his 15th it's the 15th jungle brigade, is what the and in the 15th BAE, um, uh, Army aviation unit. So I was wearing his green shirt. He was wearing my black shirt. And we're playing basketball, and so I get called to do the mission, and I rebrief it, just to make sure we brief it. And a Navy SEAL who wanted to come on board, and I briefed him, and I didn't want him on board, but I'm like, all right, he's your ops guy. Caved in. Come on, Matt, let's go. And I, made him get a helmet first and make sure he had his combat diver's vest. I showed him, hey, this is how the doors open. We go through all the emergency procedures. We go through like what the dunker procedures are. You got to get a handhold,
Mhm.
and if you can't see, you know which way you're going to go. We brief all that, right? Strapping in the cockpit, getting gas, getting ready to go, strapping in the cockpit. The guy who was flying with, his name was Captain Javier Perez. Good dude. Um, uh, Part indigenous, so he had the respect of his troops. In many of the Latin American countries there, the officers are of European descent more than they
Mm.
are indigenous.
Mhm.
And there is some class and, quite frankly, racism that goes
Mhm.
on there, right? But he was a mixed race, and he was a former infantry officer and served on the border during the war with Peru. So his guys truly respected him, and he was a good dude. It's just that the way their tactics were different from ours. We had to agree to certain things. Where this is where this mission gets dangerous. You're
Mhm.
flying in someone else's aircraft in their language, and terminology, as you know, has to be exact. I
Mhm.
mean, we had just a couple days where we were going to use, agreed to what terms we were going to use in Spanish, you know, clear right, clear left, clear to fire, you know, the fact that you say left and right as opposed to
Mhm.
port and starboard in the Navy was a big deal between pilots back in the 50s. So
Yeah.
we had to agree to certain specific terminology, right? And so here we are getting in the cockpit about 11:30 in the afternoon, and I get this heartburn, man, right here in my solar plex. I'm like, I had to take a couple breaths, and I'm getting strapped in. The radios are on, and I'm like, "Mm," you know, I just shake it off. I'm like, all right, let's go. Fangs
Mhm.
grow back. Let's go. And we flew out to the range. We check in with, so this range was on this part of the Napo River. And this portion of the river was east west. And on the south side, on the beach, there was this ridge, and that's where the firing impact area was. So we were going to be flying these, we call them racetrack patterns. I refer to as like it's your NASCAR racetrack pattern, right? Oval pattern where you shoot going in and then you turn away and then you come back and do it again. And we
Mhm.
were doing it that way so that each controller can get training on making sure they see the aircraft, call your wings level, give you them the procedural, what we refer to as the 9 line, very specific
Mhm.
instructions, my position, enemy position, what angles you're going to fire so there's no fratricide. And, we did this over a period of a couple weeks. First, we did it on the classroom board. Then we did it dry. Then we did it with no, then we flew it with no weapons. And then we
Mhm.
flew it live fire. And this was like the second or third day of live fire training that we were doing to get all their students like their second or third run at calling the aircraft. Now, the pilots,
Had you flown with this guy before?
yeah, we flew a week prior to get familiarization
So,
in the aircraft with these
did you
guys.
trust him?
Yes, to a certain extent, right? Again, the fact that you're sitting in the left seat, which is the co-pilot seat
Yeah.
in a helo, but these aircraft were in effect single piloted because the instrument stack was only on the right side.
Mhm.
The left side just had the big windshield bubble on the front of it. The collective or the power, which is on your left side, um, telescoped, so it could be put away, and the cyclic could even fold. So the
Wow.
agreement was that we, the gringos, were out there to teach these guys how to fly.
Mm.
We were there to teach them the procedural part, and that we were going to be translating when needed, and
Yeah.
also the fire control safety guys to ensure our guys wouldn't get shot on the ground.
Yeah. So tell the audience too what type of aircraft you're in.
So, and I'm assuming you're going to put up a picture later, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay.
So it was a Gazelle 342L, um, French helicopter, attack helicopter, very nimble, reliable helicopter. The Brits flew it, the French flew it. Um, how the Ecuadorian army came around to using them, not sure, but I'm sure they got some kind of deal. And they also had Puma, uh, twin engine transport helicopters that were going to be used for the riverine portion of, dropping the guys in the boats and picking things up in the hoist and that stuff. So that
That's
was the
that's the
two parts
aircraft
mission.
in that's the aircraft in Rambo, if I remember correctly. They said was a
Yeah.
Hind, but it was actually a Puma.
Yeah. It was a Puma that was all dressed up
Yeah, it
like a
had the
hind,
weapons.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And the Puma's a very reliable aircraft that's been throughout the world, and so is the Gazelle. The aerodynamics are a little funky because it's got that fan
Mhm.
in the tail rotor, which has a
Yep.
little bit of more lift in the back, and I get three blades as opposed to two. As a Huey, because it's about the size of a Huey. It looks a little bit like a Little Bird because it's got that big bulb
Bubble.
front,
Yeah.
but it's
Yeah.
bigger, right? It's
Right.
almost it's about the size of a Huey.
It's like that show Blue Thunder in the '80s. Remember
Oh
that
yeah,
helicopter? It looks kinda like
Blue
that.
Thunder as opposed to
Airwolf.
Airwolf,
Yeah, that
because
was a
Airwolf was a really sleek,
badass
balanced
show.
prototype,
Yeah.
but it looked more like that Blue Thunder
Yeah.
helicopter, and I don't know, I don't remember what the actual helicopter they used in the movie, but yeah, it
I
kinda
don't
looks like
remember,
that.
but it had that fan for the tail rotor on it,
Yep.
if I remember right.
So, we got our familiarization flights in it, and again, there was supposed to be a waiver because, I mean, I'll talk about this later. Um, because of my crash and another crash where, one of our F-16 pilots died in a Cessna, '02, uh, the rules were rewritten that if any American is gonna be in the back of an aircraft with the host nation for tactical operations, there better be a pilot, an American pilot up front with approved access to the flight controls and fully trained in that area, which I didn't have both, right? I got some training in it, but again, I wasn't supposed to be flying it. I was more of
Yeah,
an observer and,
right.
um, uh, yeah, and we didn't have full control of the aircraft.
Yeah.
Well, bottom line, I mean, these guys were flying too, everything else they were doing great. And then when they got into their tactical phase, they were like right down on the trees, right down on the water, flying with what's called the stabilization system. Their SAS. It's kind of like, I wouldn't say cruise control, but it's more like power steering and assist, and it stabilizes, and you can use trim so that you can level the aircraft, kind of take your hands off the flight controls for a second or
Mhm.
two, right? But they would turn it off because it made them feel one with the aircraft. Is literally what he said in
Mm.
Spanish to me. I'm like, "It's great until you get shot,"
No kidding.
right? And, so we agreed to turn the SAS on and not to fly below the tree line
Mhm.
when you're over the river, because these guys were coming right down above the river's surface
Wow.
and hauling ass. And there was an island, a mangrove island in the middle of this really wide river that they'd scooch behind to mask behind it
Oh,
so that the
yeah.
scouts, the FARC scouts out in the jungle. I'm like, great, but we got a pretty, heavily armed helo with, one of them had rockets and the other one had these twin barreled 7.2 machine gun,
Mhm.
machine gun pods on both sides. And that day we were flying the machine gun aircraft. The other aircraft was on the border of Peru, and the Pumas were there too. So there were no helos other than the one we were flying, and then our combat controller and a couple of the SEALs and this boat guys were on the river's edge at the range, getting ready to receive training. That was about 10 clicks. Oh, well, no, let me rephrase that: 12 to 10 kilometers from the jungle base. So not
Okay.
a long flight.
Yeah.
The river at that portion was about 9 to 10 feet deep, uh, but flowing at about 6 knots. So not
Wow.
rapids,
Yeah.
but a little bit of churning water,
Yeah.
pretty fast moving water. You can't
Mhm.
swim against that kind
No,
of current.
Mm-mm.
And all kinds of debris, brown, nasty water, oil from the exploratory rigs. There were piranha in the river because we ate piranha. So, so they have a jungle survival course, and it's called Selva.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you talked about this.
SELVA, and that
Yeah.
means jungle in Spanish, right? And it's one of the most advanced, like, complicated jungle survival courses, triple canopy jungle. I mean, our special forces use their indigenous folks as trackers
Wow.
on different missions and stuff, right? So we went through the gentleman's course because they go through it for a month. They get thrown in the jungle and they got to survive with a machete and a canteen of water. After they get the training. So
Hmm.
we ate lemon ants. We ate piranha. They basically used basically charges to blow up the water, and friggin' piranha would float to the river's edge, and then we cooked the piranha. And so yeah, that and over Cayman, small like
Yeah.
alligator, like
Yeah.
uh, and
Probably anaconda
there was a
too,
river,
right?
there were river crocodiles here and there
Wow.
throughout the
Yeah.
area. Um, so that day, September 19th, 1996, is the day of my crash. It was a Thursday. The week, and this is where I'm going to go back to. I got to believe that I had some divine intervention on my behalf. A week prior to that, we were doing our civil affairs part of the mission. All these missions have a civil affairs part where you go out winning hearts and minds. Our doc goes and gives shots to the kids. They check their teeth. They do and so we were going on a Cayuca, big taxi, basically canoe to this village with their civil affairs officers, and we were just going to go buy stuff,
Hmm.
trinkets and do the giving the kids malaria pills and checking their teeth and that kind of thing. I met a Baptist missionary, an American Baptist missionary. The river was running high where we were, and he goes, "Hey, so American flag, no patches, and my plain name tag.
Hmm.
You're an American. I'm dark skinned. I'd shaved. I wasn't wearing a mustache for that deployment, but I hadn't shaved." I go, "Yeah," and we chat for a bit, and he goes, "Hey, this village that you guys are visiting, they lost one of their canoes. It sunk. And, this canoe is their livelihood. That's how they get goods to the base to sell them. And could you guys go out and find it?" I'm like, "Sure. Let me check with the guys and go back to the SEALs are like, let's go. They
Hmm.
want to, use their balloons and all the things that they can, raise their boat with. Um, but the pilots were like, "No, we don't have fuel. We don't have time. We're not going to go wait." And no shit, Steve. The argument that myself and Mike had with them, I go, "If you crash in the jungle and one of these villagers come upon you, who do you want them to turn you over to? To the base or to the FARC? Because depending on who's in charge that day, if the FARC had come over, they're stealing chickens and making them pay a tax, you
Hmm.
know, and quite frankly, at throughout history too, the military had been like, crushing the rebellion of these same villagers. There was like
Hmm.
20 different tribes down there. So, like, all right. We convince them, like, first of all, we're paying for your fuel, and we actually brought you ammo. And this argument about, hey, if you crash, who do you want these guys to turn you over to? And they go, "Okay,
Yeah.
fine." And literally, Steve, we flew for maybe 5 minutes and found the
Found it.
canoe. It's partially sunk, marked it on the GPS, go back. The SEALs go out in their Zodiac with the Ecuadorians. They raise the canoe and drag it back to the village, and they're heroes.
Yeah.
So a week to that day, right? That Thursday prior is the day we crash. And
Man.
I'm getting to that because, you know, I mean, I'm not going to go through the whole crash sequence. I barely made it to the surface. Because of my training,
Hmm.
I was able to survive. And this is where I say, in the beginning of my book, I go, "Look, I had a no quit attitude. I had
Hmm.
discipline. I had grit. All the stuff that Jocko Willenick and Goggins, badass guys. I had that attitude.
Yeah.
But after my crash, when I was alone in the river, I spent all my training, all my discipline. There was a moment of despair that none of that served me. So I kind of jumping ahead, but
Can you just
yeah.
share at least, I mean, I get you don't wanna go through the whole sequence, but can you share the part where you're basically praying and you don't want, I'm paraphrasing because I read it the other day, but basically you don't wanna lose, Shelly and your girls, like, "Please don't take me away from
Yep.
my." Can you kinda
So I
go
mean,
into that
yeah,
some?
Yeah, I don't mind going through a crash if you got time. So
I
bottom
think you
line,
should. I think
yep,
you should.
pilot
Yeah.
error. The guy, when he agreed not to descend, he came off an attack run, came down to 3 feet.
Damn.
We're accelerating
Three
away
feet.
3 feet over the water. I'm looking at the skids and I'm looking at the water, that skid.
Shit.
And I'm like, so they have a voice actuated ICS where you don't have to push a button. Right. And I kind of spit into it. So make sure the ICS turns on and I'm like, come up now.
Yeah.
And I looked left because I was gonna say clear left, and that's usually, he knows he can turn left, very succinct, clear in Spanish. And he glanced over to me. He had the visor down. He glanced over to me, goes, okay. And I'm expecting, I'm waiting for the aircraft to, come up or the nose maybe just pitch up a little bit. But what happened instead is the nose plunged down. And then at first, I tell people the initial impact wasn't that violent. And maybe it's, when you're in a stressful environment, your mind races, right? And everything's in slow motion. And and it felt like, when you're riding a boat and you got the throttle way up and you pull the
Mhm.
throttle back and the boat kind of surges forward. That's what it felt like at first for that first split second. And then it was incredible violence.
What
I could see the
what
black, muddy water coming up, just rushing up through the cabin or through the cockpit, because it's all glass down there, right? And training kicks in, wait for all violent motion to stop. I thought about possibly, like right before that, taking the flight controls, even on his
Mhm.
side if I needed to, because mine,
Yeah.
you know, uh, but at the same time, I didn't want to touch the flight controls because I didn't want to create any more turbulence, that
Yeah.
he might be flying with. And so, um, this incredible violence, explosion, sky, black, and I remember kind of bringing my arms in, bracing, wait for all violent motion to stop. That's what we're trained, to do in the Dunker. Go
Did
ahead.
he just was he just going too fast and the aircraft got
So,
ahead of him? What happened? Like, how did he
so
put it in the
I,
water?
interesting enough, at this special operations week conference I was in last week, just 2 nights ago, I had it. I actually was chatting with a British special ops pilot who had flown Gazelles for a
Oh,
long time, and he goes, John, with that fan in tail that tends to have lift on the tail. And it goes, and you guys were pretty nose down, right? When you were going at that airspeed.
yeah.
I go, yeah, heck yeah. He goes, that could have been an aerodynamic effect that it could have dipped when he was trying to adjust. Because again, two Air Force accident investigators showed up later. The Ecuadorians would not cooperate because they didn't want to get get blamed for trying to kill a gringo, even though their own guys died. So a full investigation was never able to be facilitated or completed. Now I was interviewed, right, by the guys. I still had tubes, coming out of me in the hospital, and
Mhm.
they were able to recover the wreckage. I think you have a picture of that also, of what's left of the aircraft in the
Mhm.
hangar. So, uh, I was probably ejected through the cockpit immediately. The harness probably failed, and certain, it could have been the bar that separates the windshield that hit my right knee on the way out. The blades could have hit my left leg, but my left leg had a torsion type of injury right above my boot line. I had broken ribs and a really bad groin injury. But that initial impact, like I said, slow motion. I'm underwater. Trying to figure out where my stuff is. We fly with a pony, like little steel tank referred to as a HEEDS bottle, HEEDS, helicopter emergency egress device, and it's basically a little pony scuba tank, and
Mhm.
it gives you enough air so that when you're underwater, you can calm down and get out, right?
Mhm.
And through the Dunker training, it's drilled into you. Have a handhold.
Yeah.
So if you're upside down and it's black, you know how to get out, right? You know where the
Right.
handle is. And so I remember everything finally stops. All violent motion stops. So I'm underwater. I can't find my heat bottle. So I'm like, okay, fine. Let's handhold. Can't find a handhold. Reach down for my buckle. The buckle's not there. And I kind of do this, and I'm underwater. I'm like, shit, there's nothing around me. I'm in the water.
Mhm.
And I was a strong swimmer, lifeguard training, all this stuff, swimming with the seals in the river too. Well, when we were there working out with them, I couldn't get to the surface. I finally somehow get to the surface. I couldn't get my inflation lobes inflated because they were different from my Navy ones, and they were under your armpits. And I had broken ribs. That's the one thing that hurt right away, even underwater. And I was able to get it untangled, and I was able to pull the tab with my right hand with the lobe underneath my left rib cage, or between my armpit, because it was my left rib cage that hurt, and I couldn't reach as far with my left hand, and I'm left-handed.
Okay.
So finally, boom, the thing inflates. They're called May West because they're big bulbous things.
Yeah.
Get up, and I get the other one inflated, and I'm kind of in a prone position, to design that way so you can't roll over and drown.
Right.
And I look down, and my right knee is bent at 90 degrees, like you're sitting, except for my shin is a couple inches back, and the femur sticking out and it's split open, like
Wow.
right there. And my ankle is also another 90 degrees out to the side. I'm like, oh, it didn't hurt. I'm like, shocked, right?
Yeah.
Dang. And then my left boot is kind of flopping around in the water. My pant leg is intact, so I can't see the injury. So right above my boot line, around my mid of lower calf, everything was destroyed, and basically my leg was still attached via my what was left of my calf muscle. I didn't, so ribs are hurting. I'm checking, everything first. Okay, my hands are good, and I noticed there was some blood on my chin. I had maybe a little nick on my chin. I used to tell people, "Yeah, I'm still pretty. I still got just a nick on my chin." But so I'm going through all that stuff. I hear Matt. I'll just use his first name because I can only use his first name. Matt,
Yeah.
the Navy
Yeah.
SEAL that was with me. He had played football at the University of Washington, linebacker, big dude.
Yeah.
Not, maybe 6 foot, but big, thick dude.
Yeah.
What saved his life was his mass.
Mm.
Otherwise, his neck would have snapped. He was sitting kind of
Wow.
sideways behind the pilot. His head hit the seat. He had told me later that he had passed out, came to underwater, was about to accept his death and just sucked the water in. And he said he heard my voice
Wow.
calling him, and he reached out in that direction. And next thing he knew, he was coming to the surface.
Man.
I don't know if that's in the book.
It's not. It's
All
not.
right, so
No, I've read
so
this. Yeah.
that's something he shared with me
He
later
was
when
on the aircraft when
yeah,
he hurt in the book. He's like already on the surface on the aircraft,
yeah.
and
So
he's
so
yelling
when
at
I
you.
when I'm finally to the surface, I hear his voice, "Hey, LT, Lieutenant, you okay?" And I literally said, "Yeah, I'm alive, but my legs are all fucked up." That's
Yeah.
exactly what I said. And he's like, and I could see him, and I can't remember what the distance was, but I can clearly see him standing on the wreckage because the tail was sticking out of the water. And I could see the blood coming down his forehead. So he
Yeah.
had a gash on his forehead. And again, his injuries were he had a cervical injury and he had a broken ankle. And that's what I could recall, because later we met again several times, right? So he's trying to go back in to get the pilot. I said, "Where's Javier? Javier Perez." He goes, "Sorry, I think he's pinned underwater." And I'm like, Navy pilot training with I'm like, my HEADS bottle, which I couldn't find before, I had realized was still attached to a lanyard. All your gear in your survival vest is attached to a lanyard so you don't lose it, right?
Yeah.
And I'm able to like fish it up, and I'm like, my HEADS bottle's here. And I'm like, Matt, stick the HEADS model in his mouth. At least, in my mind, he's drowning. He's trying to get out of the cockpit. He's stuck
Hmm.
underwater. And shit, if the thing's still sticking out of the water, maybe Matt can get to him. And at the same token, I'm like, get back to Matt because he can help me out, right? Matt tries to talk me to the river's edge. I can't get to it. Um, he's still trying to do his thing, and he's diving through the fuel and everything else. I'm sure he burned his eyes, and I'm getting pulled away, and I'm blue, and at this point too, I'm profusely bleeding into the river. I remember the water being cool, but not, actually comfortably.
Hmm.
It's a jungle river, but the water was cooler than the outside air. So maybe that helped constrict my blood vessels a
Oh
little bit.
yeah. Yeah.
Not sure, but and my tourniquet, my one hand tourniquet right here on my right, like, on my vest right here.
Hmm.
Didn't even think about pulling my tourniquet out. Right. And so going down the river, and I'm like, all right, I have to prepare myself for rescue. Going through my checklist. The little monkey in the back of your brain that wants to flip out is under
Hmm.
control. He's
Hmm.
he's stuck back in his cage while my training's kicking in. And I'm literally in my head talking to myself, John, checklist. Took my gloves off. I'm taking my, checking for other injuries. And then I'm like, okay. PRC radio. Back then it was just a VHF, UHF emergency frequency, no GPS in it. And then I realized I'm about to make a call. Even though I had my combat controller and the team on the south side of the river, which probably, God knows, maybe 500 yards away, half a click maybe from where we crashed. And that he's over there with those guys. And I gotta believe I can't remember if they actually saw it or it was past the horizon when they heard it.
I was going to ask if they
Yeah,
saw it go down. Yeah.
and quite frankly, I can't remember if they did see it or not. But obviously, they ended up at the wreckage, right?
Hmm.
The river's pulling me downstream, right? And now I can no longer hear Matt, and I'm alone, right? But I'm still going through my checklist. All right, I got to get myself ready. You're trained when you go through survival training this recently is the case in Iran. The guys who got shot down. One of the reasons why that the colonel didn't get picked up that night is because I mean, again, I'm not sure this is true or not, but I had heard that he didn't know how to turn on his radio, his
Oh,
C cell, which has a GPS beacon in it. And then he had to do
goodness.
his, because they could have picked him up and, that crew was trolling for him and they got
Yeah.
shot up and had to leave. Right.
Wow.
So you're taught that you have to prepare yourself to help your rescuers.
Right.
50% of of whether you're going to survive and get rescued is what you do prepare yourself. And being from that community that we had to go out and rescue guys, is ingrained in me.
Yeah.
So I pull out my med kit. And before I remember when we were not in Afghanistan in Bosnia, I remember there was some other stuff in there, but all I could see was the diarrhea pills and some aspirin into the clear plastic. So I literally tossed it in the water. Right, that ain't gonna help me once the pain kicks in.
Right.
I didn't even think about the aspirin. Probably maybe bleed out more.
No kidding.
And so at that point, I was like, you know, the other helo's not here. I totally forgot about Jack and his team. I can't hear anybody. I'm in the river looking up, and I'm like, my other little voice in my head goes, John, you're gonna die here. And take that breath, look up, and I'm about to. I mean, I start saying the Lord's Prayer because that was my go-to. Like I said, as a uh, as a little kid, right? And just about the point I'm about to accept it. I mean, again, this is split seconds, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, uh, guilt, guilt kicks in. The first thing I think about is like, "Fuck, what's going to happen to Shelly? The girls, my girls were 4 and 5 years old, barely 5
Yeah.
and 4 years old at the time. And I'm like, I can't do this to them. And I tell you, Steve, I mean, when you're in these situations, I was not afraid of dying.
Yeah.
I mean, I was afraid. I was afraid of leaving my kids. I was afraid of what was going to happen to my wife. That's what I was afraid of. I can't do this to them, right? And now the first time I said this in church, I mean, my first time I told this story like this was testimony in church. I told the survival story, all that stuff, but this part, first time it was my pastor who pulled it out of me. And I started praying, pleading out loud. I can still be a good father. I can still be a good husband. And if you ever saw the movie Born on the 4th of July, for some reason I had this image of myself like Tom Cruise with long hair
Yeah.
with no legs. Because again, the one that was so graphic was my right leg. I'm thinking this thing's
Hmm.
gone. Like the
Yeah.
left leg, I couldn't see the injuries. I didn't realize that was the one that was worse off.
Hmm.
So as I was trying to paddle back at some point too, I actually grabbed my boot and I flipped it over to hope, oh, well, they can reattach that.
Hmm.
Right. And, I, getting a little bit of tunnel vision, I guess, haziness. And I look downriver and I'm like blinking because it's fuzzy. And I see this canoe coming towards me. And I'm like, there's not in the book, but there's another story about a canoe I acquired in Africa and smuggled it back to the United States
Nice.
inside a Pavlo, inside a C
Nice.
17. So I had this knack for canoes, right?
Yeah.
And then the week before, I did a good deed, hopefully. And I didn't think about it right then, other than like, I shook my head going, okay, these two guys pulling upriver. Immediately I reach for my 9 mil. I go, these guys good guys? Are they bad guys? Is the FARC? And I could see the concern looked on the guy's face up front. These were two indigenous guys. And I said, auxilio, help in Spanish. And the guys are, waving and going, yeah. And so they come towards me and, my broken Spanish and the other guy's broken Spanish, because that was not his first language, his native language. The other guy didn't even speak. I'm assuming the guy could barely speak Spanish. So whatever native language, Quechua, that he spoke is what his native language was. There were shorts, they're fishing the canoe, little piranha flopping around in there, and they had a trolling motor. And that's one of the other things I was like, man, if these guys can afford a trolling motor, with a big battery on it, you know, what else? They're not just selling fish, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that was but at that point I could see that it didn't matter. These guys, I could see in his eyes, he was, truly concerned for me. They pull me in the canoe. They put a bucket under this leg, and actually the bucket ended up being under both legs, and that was excruciating. And then
Yeah.
and they go la base. That was really, just concise Spanish. The base, right? The base. Yes, la base. That's where I need to go, is what it basically was saying.
Yeah.
And but then I stopped them. I go, whoa, 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 mi amigos are like right there, but they weren't right there. In my mind, they were still right there, like, a
Yeah.
couple of yards away from me, but the river had taken me downrange. And they're looking around, they going, okay, we're going in that direction. Next thing I know, I can hear, I call it gurney vision because I'm lying there looking up and
Hmm.
all you can see is up. I can hear Jack, our combat controller, arguing with Matt, the Navy SEAL that was on the
Mm.
aircraft with me. And I can hear him say, look, Perez is dead. It doesn't matter at this point. You need to get the lieutenant back. Me. Get in the effing canoe now. And when I heard that, everything kicks back in, and I'm like, shit, Javier Perez is underwater drowning. And the He's bottle at this point now is, I could see it. It's between my legs. And I might start yelling at Jack, the He's bottle between my legs. Get it to Javier. And I guess at this point, Jack must have been just frustrated with everything, trying to get Matt to stop diving to go in to get the dude.
Yeah.
With his injury, it's interesting, when you're injured, you focus, you kind
Hmm.
of tunnel vision, focus on something. Matt's holy grail was he wanted to get that pilot out of that seat.
Hmm.
We didn't know that Javier had died on impact.
Oh,
In
wow.
fact, the instrument panel basically crushed his upper
Oh,
torso and his face.
damn.
We didn't know that, right? Matt
Yeah.
couldn't tell,
Right.
because it's black muddy water in there.
Hmm.
Jack is the one who had to go underwater and with a mask and could barely see close up, got to see this, which later
Damn.
he said was not a pleasant sight. Um, so next thing you know, Jack's in my face. He's like, "Sir, shut the fuck up. You're gonna be fine. You're
Yeah.
gonna live." And at that point, I was like, "What do you mean? At that point, I'd already made my peace with God. I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm giving up my legs. I'd already accepted it. I'm giving up my legs for my girls.
Hmm.
And just to step back, again, I'm Catholic. Saint Michael, and patron saint of cops, patron saint of
Hmm.
airborne, patron saint
Hmm.
of aviators. I used to carry a Saint Michael coin with me. I used to have it on. I used to carry one that was on my dog tags. I didn't have one that day because it was back in my kit. What I had on my dog tags was my 4-year-old daughter's piece of her blankie.
Awesome.
So it
Yeah.
was
That's
tucked in the
awesome.
silencer. And when I went to Yugoslavia before I left on a trip, little ratty blankie kids
Hmm.
have. She ripped a piece off of it and she goes, "Here, Daddy, this is to keep you safe."
That's sweet.
So
Yeah.
I had
That's
my
sweet.
ring, my wedding ring on, because usually you always took it off before
Can't wear it.
flying,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it would be around my chain and my dog tags and my dog tags. Um, I started to try to say my Hail Marys
Mm.
that I used to go back to as a kid, and I couldn't get to it. And I remember John, and I would start over again, Hail Mary, full of grace, you know, and I couldn't get to it, and that's when the canoe shows up, right? If the Hail Mary ends with, pray for our sinners at the
Hmm.
hour of our death. I couldn't
Hmm.
I couldn't get to that line.
Wow.
A prayer that I used to say over and over as a kid because I was always in trouble, with our with our nun smacking me on the knuckles.
Yeah.
I couldn't get past the second line of, you know, Holy Mary, Mother of God. Or that's the third line before he gets to, pray for sinners now and at the hour of death. And my son, by the way, who's going to Duke University for his master's in Christian studies, he wants to become a priest in the Episcopalian Church and possibly a chaplain in the military.
Nice.
He's like, Dad, you know, and this was 30 years later. He goes, maybe, maybe that was something, some divine intervention there. Why you couldn't finish that prayer,
Yeah.
right? So, my daughter weaves that into the story really poetically, right? But so Matt now cannot get in the canoe because he's so big.
Mhm.
He's holding on to the edge of canoe. They're taking me up back to the 19th Jungle Brigade. They have a makeshift little pier there. At that same time, like I said, Jack had already called back on the radio our base. They had heard something happen. They weren't sure. What I understand, Doc Basinger, who was a flight surgeon, had said that they had thought we'd done a precautionary landing or that we might have crashed on the jungle river's edge or something.
Yeah.
So they're loading up to get ready to come down on a Zodiac boat, right?
Mhm.
But as they are trucking towards the river's edge, we had already gotten to the pier. Matt had gotten out of the water and was running back to our barracks to grab his fins and his mask so he could go back and pull Javier out of the
Damn.
helicopter.
Wow.
So they grab him. They go, dude, they see this guy, limping and bleeding, get in
Yeah.
the truck. And they show up to the river's edge. Meanwhile, let me go back a sec because it's an important part about, Jimmy Buffett. I grew up with Jimmy Buffett. Parrot his since kid. And I used to dance and sing. My girls were my backup singers. In fact, back then I had a C, I traveled with a CD player and I had all the Jimmy
That's
Buffett's
right.
hits. And I left the four, CDs for Shelly and the girls in case something happened to me, they can remember me by.
Mhm.
Matt was a big Jimmy Buffett fan. So he's rubbing my chest, trying to keep me awake in the canoe. In the canoe, I'm trying to pass out. I'm like, okay, at some point the pain's got to be bad enough where you could pass out. God, please let me pass out.
Yeah.
And he's trying to keep me awake. And he's like, come on, sir, let's sing, Margaritaville one more time. Let's sing the cheeseburger song. Come on.
Yeah.
Right. So uh, just a little, point of humor there. Uh, because again, there was nothing funny about it at the time. So they rushed back.
No, no.
Yeah. So there's actually a videotape of what they did to me in the canoe to try to rescue me.
No
And then there's
kidding.
immediate
Wow.
footage of me in the makeshift clinic.
Wow.
Where that there's a screenshot of it in the book, when I'm in the
Yeah.
canoe sprawled out. One of the Navy SEALs, Jeremy Trump, barely 20 years old, troubled child of the team, who flunked corpsman school on purpose because back then they couldn't get corpsmen to get through buds. He
Mhm.
he was a brand new SEAL. They sent him to corpsman school. He flunks, so he's the first guy in my face. Big wad of chew in his mouth. You're gonna be just fine. And I kid with him. In fact, we had a little reunion this last week at Soft Week. I had him up on the
Oh,
stage.
that's awesome.
My daughter and I
That's
got to talk
awesome.
about the book, and I had him up there. He
That's
finally got to
amazing.
meet my daughter. I mean, she told him 2 or 3 times, "Hey, thank you for saving my dad."
Mhm.
30 years later, right?
Yeah, that's
And
very
he
cool.
retired as a
Very
Master
cool.
Chief. Spent his whole adult life in the teams.
Wow.
And but I get around with him. I go, the first dude that works on me is the guy who flunked corpsman school.
Yeah.
But so the bottom line is, there's this. Meanwhile, they're trying. The orders are to get me to Panama.
Mhm.
3-hour flight and an hour ride in Panamanian traffic to get from Howard to the hospital, Gorgas Hospital. Joe Basinger, the flight doc, our team doc, who had trauma training, also was like, no, they had surveyed the hospital in Quito, the capital of Ecuador, and it was a modern hospital. And he's like, no, we're taking him there. And then they go, well, how are we going to get him up? We can't truck him because he won't survive the truck ride home. And then there was another airfield, Lago Agrio, where the C-130 landed. That's another 2 hours there. So they're trying to figure this out. There is a little airfield in Coca, 3,000-foot little broken up strip, which the C-130 was not authorized beforehand. They go, you can't land here because you're too heavy. And
Yeah.
there's too much shit all over the place. They got emergency permission to do it. The SEALs go out, clear the place at gunpoint. pretty much. My daughter exaggerates a little bit. They all showed up armed just in case. They didn't have to do it at gunpoint, right? But
Right, right, right.
they're clearing lean-tos and chickens and goats out of the way. Meanwhile, like again, our guys did uh commandeer the tower. Because the guys in the tower's like, there's no way a C-130 can land in here when they're coming in.
Yeah.
Brian Downs, Major Brian Downs, at the time, Captain Brian Downs. Again, another like piece of divine intervention. These guys, kid with the C-130 guys are always in their Gucci bags and in big hotels. We're in the jungle. People kid around the Air Force, right? But the helo guys were always in the jungle with the Rangers and
Yeah.
and they're up in a 5-star hotel. They're ready to go shopping, gold shopping or whatever. Brian goes back to get his sweater, and the lady at the front desk goes, "Are you Captain Downs? The embassy has an emergency call for you." 30 seconds, 5 seconds, they could have been gone. I would have never been out of the jungle. So
Wow.
they man up, get in the airplane, and they literally almost crash land in the jungle to get me out. Do a running, what's called the ERO, running engine running on load, where the C1. So like in Iran, you heard about the C-130s got stuck in the sand and had to blow them up because they
Yeah.
couldn't get out. So
Yep.
in some locations, the C-130 will keep taxing,
Mm.
keep moving on the ground so it doesn't sink in the ground. But different reason for what happened in Iran. But these guys had to do that. Pick up me in a pickup truck with the team. I'm strapped to a board, and the pickup truck comes up behind the helicopter. The guys jump off, run me onto the C-130. C-130 closes the ramp. They have to do a 180-degree out without sinking in the sand and dirt and shit again. Take off, barely clear the trees, and a heroic flying, and got me
Yeah.
out. 35 minutes later, we're in Quito. An ambulance from the embassy takes me to the hospital. That's where they did the amputation. Um, when Joe Basinger woke up, he spent 48 hours awake by my bedside. He's my son's
Wow.
godfather. We had a baby after
Yeah, I
that.
believe it.
He
I
became his
believe it.
godfather. We're dear friends to this day.
Yeah.
Um, so Joe was waking me up. He goes, "Johnny," because I remember them poking my heel. That's the last sensation I had in my left foot. They were poking my heel to see if I could feel stuff. They put one of those halo contraptions on. But my blood, lost so much blood, and the fact that, it was already past the 24-hour mark, my blood labs were really getting bad, and I was on the verge of infection. But I had this condition called DIC, which you swell up. I was dying, and
Yeah.
he had to force him to take my leg. And when
Mm.
he woke me up to tell me that, I mean, he was in tears. I do remember. He goes, "Johnny, we're going to have to take your left leg." And the first thing I asked him was, "Well, what about my right leg? Because that's the one that was always for sure, right?"
Yeah.
He goes, "No, we can save that." And I remember kind of like in that haze, because I finally had morphine at that point, right? At that point, I'm kind of going back under, and I'm like, "Thank you." I wasn't saying thank you to him. I said, because he told me, "Why did you tell me thank you?" Later, he goes, "Dude, I was telling you I'm taking your leg, and you're saying thank you." In my mind, I was thanking God.
Yeah.
I was like, "Thank you, Lord. I get to keep one of my legs." I used to kid around later. I got the 2-for-1 deal, right? I was ready to give up both legs for my
Yeah.
family, but I got one back, right? I only got
Yeah.
50% off that deal by the Lord. And then there was another ordeal to get me out of the country. C-141 happened to be in Chile delivering a propeller to a nuclear sub that had been damaged. So it was on a classified mission. They reconfigure it. A Learjet comes from Luke Air Force Base, grabs the team. They join up in Panama. And then so I crashed on a Thursday at noon. I was up in Quito by 1600 that afternoon, 4:30 ish. All crazy stuff happened overnight. Saturday morning, I had the amputation. The amputation was done in Ecuador. They didn't close it. They left it open. They call it guillotine cut,
Wow.
and they pack it with gauze.
Huh.
And they reset my right leg, and part of the stuff is they're just washing all the stuff out. I'm full of
Yeah.
antibiotics. Um, the team is going to say goodbye to me. They all came back up, and all these badass dudes were crying. And I'm like, what? I'm going home, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't know that I was still on the verge of death, right?
Yeah.
And I do remember one of the guys, his name's John Lopes, Captain John Lopes. shows up with 2 teddy bears in a bag and a rose, and he goes, "Dude, you gotta deliver this to your wife and kids." So I grab him. Right, I'm in this big gurney thing, all strapped down, a big itchy green blanket, and I'm holding on to him. And then I see the flight nurse come out, beautiful lady, angel. And I'm like, I'm thinking my wife is a nurse, right? And this lady's in a flight suit and all this stuff. And then I see the flag as they're pulling, as they're wheeling me in. The C-141 was the second largest aircraft at the time, after the
Hmm.
C-5.
Yeah,
And
it's a big airplane.
big cavernous space, and I see the flag hanging. And I'm like, I'm going home. My brothers and sisters have me.
Hmm.
And thinking God again, right? The nurse came to take the bag away to put it in with my other stuff. And I'm like, nope. This is, we use the term PC, precious cargo.
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah.
nope, this is my precious cargo that I got to deliver. I didn't say it. And I mean, it was, going through my head. And she's like, cool. In the meantime, my squadron flew my wife and my mom out to Lackland Air Force Base, Kelly at San Antonio. My dad was in Tibet on a
Mm.
trek. He had a dream that something happened on the west side of some mountain, and he knew it was
Wow.
me. He saw an explosion. He
Huh.
was able to get to the village, mayor or whatever, and he was able to call home. Spoke to my brother who was at the store, and he said, "What happened to John?" My mom had told my brother, "Don't tell him anything. Your dad's
Man.
trying, in Tibet." And he broke down. I said, "Yes, something happened to Dad. Just get or to John. Get home." So my dad's now on this track to get back.
Hmm.
So, I mean, all this stuff that happened. I know we've been on for a long time, but
No, no, it's a powerful
yeah.
story, man. It's a powerful story.
So I get back to the hospital. I see Shelly. Shelly's out there again. Incredible stuff that happens. Your brotherhood. My old boss, uh, Len King, former combat Navy diver, rescue swimmer in Vietnam, was a Mustang officer. He was my first boss. Freaking a hard dude to work for, but he was
Yeah, I
like he
bet.
was one of my mentors. He gets his nephew to show up, take your Shelly. He gets Shelly. He calls Shelly, and Shelly's like, "How did you know?" He goes, "I know. I got
Yeah.
I got my ways."
Mm.
So his nephew Mike takes care of Shelly and my mom. They get to stay in the Fisher house. I don't know if you're familiar with the Fisher
Yep,
Foundation.
yep.
Incredible foundation.
Mhm.
So they got to stay there. My brother came out for a bit. His levity helped me a lot. So when I got back and I knew that Javier died, and I talked to the accident investigator for a bit, because I'm still freaking tubes coming out of me. I mean, and I was feeling guilty. So you asked me earlier about how do I feel about this guy trying to kill me.
Yeah,
It was mixed, because at one, I'm pissed.
yeah.
Dude tried to kill me, and then it's guilt. What should I have done? What could I have done to stop him?
Mhm.
I should have known better. I should have stopped him. I shouldn't even gone on the aircraft. I should have listened to my gut. My wife and I refer to that kind of stuff as the woulda, shoulda, couldas, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And people do that throughout life for any decision that went bad, right?
Mhm.
And so I carry a lot of guilt and some mixed reactions because I truly did like this guy,
Yeah.
and he was a good man. Um, eh, and quite frankly, I was having nightmares. I mean, immediately nightmares were kicking in. Um, that one he was trying to drag me down into the mud. And not that he was
Mm.
necessarily doing it to me, but he was trying to save
Mhm.
himself, right? And he's grabbing onto me.
Yeah.
Dreams about Matt spread out on the river somewhere. I had dreams that I was getting tortured by the bad guys that captured me, sticking pokers in my leg, and I guess I was getting tortured because they were working on all that stuff.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and and Shelly's distraught. I mean, she's a nurse and she knows what's going on as an ICU
Yeah.
nurse. And our kids were being taken care of by my mother-in-law near Pensacola in Navarre, Florida. She flew down and Shelly was able to leave the girls with time. So, and I think one of Nicole overheard my wife talking to the squadron DO when they showed
Knew
up,
you were
and she's
hurt,
like, "Is
right?
Daddy
Knew you were
okay?"
hurt.
And she's like, "No,
Yeah,
Daddy's got a broken leg, but you get to sign his cast when he gets home." This is before
yeah,
Shelly knew that they were going to take my leg, right? So the girls
yeah.
didn't know any of that. We'll try to shelter them from all that.
Mhm.
And I get a chaplain assigned to me, instead of when they ask me, hey, do you want to see a psych or do you want to see a chaplain? I'm like, chaplain. Right? No, we never wanted to see a psych, right? I want to see the chaplain.
No. Yeah.
And Catholic chaplain, guy used to be a prison chaplain. You could see the weight in his eyes, the life is, major. He was a major. I think Hispanic descent too, but I'm not sure what part. But he had a way, right? And he starts working on me, and he goes, "Tell me what happened. Let's start from the beginning." And I'm like breaking down. I'm like, the guilt. And he goes, "All right, hold on. This is 1996, right? So PTSD and all that stuff. They're discussing it, but we don't
Right.
have all the techniques and everything that we have nowadays." So he goes, "You're going to tell me the story, and I know it's going to be painful. I don't want you to pretend it didn't happen."
Mhm.
He goes, "Right now, you're reliving it." He goes, "But I go, I want you to close your eyes, and you're sitting, and I'm thinking about my dad, in the breathing exercises." He goes, "I want you to pretend you're in a movie theater and you're watching it. Now you explain, I want you to describe what you're seeing. And anytime you feel like you're in it, it's around you and you're not sitting back and watching it, I want you to stop, take a deep breath, you know, release your sphincter, like the sphincter, right? And so we did that like several times a day right off the bat. And, later I'm like, all right, that's a form of PTSD, was all because, PTSD is not just about injuries. We talk about moral injuries,
Mhm.
guilt. Later, my form of PTSD was command guilt because I had lost guys under my command in Iraq. Um, so he helped me immensely, and we had a mass. He did a mass for Javier Perez.
Nice.
I got a shirt that Mike Stewart, Len King's nephew, let me. So I wore my uniform. I have, just a sheet over my shorts and stuff. But I put
Mhm.
on my Navy lieutenant bars, and we had a mass for him. And I was in my uniform for it, and that helped a lot. The nightmares started to ease up after that.
They give you some closure when you're able to do that?
I mean, it did initially, right? Partially, at least the intense part of it. Um, my mom, God bless her, she shows up with water, holy water from Lourdes, Lourdes, France, where people go,
Wow.
where Saint Bernadette saw, Christ. Um,
Mhm.
People go there to pray for miracles, for
Mhm.
for all kinds of illnesses. She had a friend who had been there and brought her some holy water, so she's sprinkling it all over me and praying and praying. You have to pray. You have to pray. So with all that. Um, and still on drugs and in a lot of pain, and I still had several surgeries to go through. They had to close my leg up.
Yeah.
That before, but they had to wash it out and debrief it, a couple times. I also had, screws and stuff put into my right knee and several
Mhm.
surgeries there. And, the ribs, they decided not to deal with it for then, at that point. So I couldn't breathe deep without, feeling that. And I ended up with this huge groin injury, almost lost my right testicle. And I remember I didn't feel that pain till after they took me off the epidural drip, about a week later. And the doc who took my, who actually did my right knee, who freaking did an incredible job on it, he goes, "Hey," he goes, "Dude," he goes, "Yeah, you might have ruptured your testicle, but we might have to take it." And he goes, "But," he goes, "Look, the good news, it'll balance out your left leg." He's trying to, and he goes, "And we could put a brass one in its place." Right. He's trying to give me the
Yeah.
badass thing. Right. And I'm like,
Yeah. Yeah.
prior to that, everyone believed that I was like, stoic and I could deal with it. And I even told my wife, I go, "Shelly, all the grieving process, you're not, everyone was surprised how positive I was." And now Shelly did see the grumpy side of me at night,
Right.
right?
Right.
Where everyone else didn't. And I used to tell him, I go, "I went through all those stages in the river when I was pleading with God." And I
Yeah.
truly believe that. Now, granted, I didn't get through all the stages of grieving, of losing my leg, but that was the outer portion that I was, projecting, the positivity that we're going to get
Mhm.
through this. And I'm not. And everyone's like, "Man, you're such a stud." And I'm like, inside, the freaking spiritual battles boiling, right? Because I'm still feeling that guilt.
Yeah.
Um, and I truly believe, a friend of mine just recently, a Marine, former Marine and Navy pilot, he's like, he goes, there is spiritual warfare when you're injured, because there you were probably battling, whatever dark darkness around you,
Yeah.
and that's what pulled you through is your faith, right?
Yeah.
And praying and believing to what you believed as a kid is what you were taught to do as a kid, that your
Mhm.
mother taught you, right?
Right.
Because again, I was like, Mom, I survived. I'm good enough. I just got my miracle out of the way. And she's like, No, you got to keep praying. Got to keep praying. Right. And I truly felt that way. I was like, I'm blessed to be alive. I got a
Mhm.
miracle. I got home,
Yeah.
but I didn't know that there was more to follow.
Right.
And you never
Did
know what the Lord has in in plans for you after that.
Well, speaking of spiritual warfare, John, did you harbor any anger towards Javier because of the crash itself?
I did for a bit. And I think the mass, I mean, again, these were days, right? And even
Yeah.
going back, go back and forth. But, but again, um, my son, know, here I'm 63 years old, and my 27-year-old son is giving me wisdom and advice. He goes, Dad, you were given grace.
Mm.
Grace is not something that you asked for, it's given to you freely. He
Mhm.
goes, give yourself and give him some grace. And that's what my priest, the priest who was taking care of me, had said too, try to give grace,
Yeah.
even to those that you don't think deserve it. But again, it's not that he didn't deserve it. It's just, again, that it's human nature that you have these conflicting things going on at the same time, you know?
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, so how did you get back into like flight status after
So,
all this? Like
so my,
I know that was a long
yeah,
process,
yeah.
but
So my, while all this was going on, my squadron commander, Tommy Hull, and he uses the word dude a lot. And one of his favorite characters was Hannibal from the A-Team, right?
mhm.
So very gregarious guy, but man, iron will and legend in our Pavlo and even in JSOC for being, gregarious guy, but still getting shit done. He had served on staff with a Navy SEAL, Lieutenant Commander Pete. I'll just use his first name for now, who had already lost his leg in about a year, 2 years prior, and was in dev group on the teams. There was a senior chief, and I'll
Dude.
use his name because I'm allowed to use his name. Senior chief at that time, Chief Tom Rothruff with an F. His call sign or nickname Rat. And now he's your stereotypical Navy SEAL, Jesse Ventura looking WWF dude, bulked out, long hair, tats everywhere. And he shows up. Well, first Pete calls me because Tommy had served with him and saw him running. He goes, Hey, do you think one of my dudes, a Navy guy, by the way, that you met, do you think he can get back to flying? He goes, Well, again, that's up to Naval Air, but we'll do whatever we can to help him.
Yeah.
And so with the backing of the Dev Group commander and stuff, because I was the Navy guy assigned to this AFSOC unit,
Yeah.
um, you know, there was a gentleman by the name of Raymond Francis. I refer to him as Pops. He's passed away a year ago at the age of 86. Um, made Carl Brashear's legs, the legs for the famous Navy diver Carl Brashear,
Yeah.
and he made orthotics. He made Pete's legs. He made Rat's legs. And at that time, Pete and Rat were the only two guys on active duty that were actually doing stuff on the team. So there was a guy who lost two legs before from the Golden Knights. I think the guy's name is
Yeah, I
Dana
remember
Bowman.
that. I remember
And
that.
I got
Yeah.
to have a little exchange with him, but he was on for a little bit, but he never got back to operational status, right? There's a Cobra pilot who lost part of his foot, I think in the 70s, but again in burns, and I think it was Panama where he was injured. I don't remember,
Okay.
but Tommy Franks,
Yeah.
General Franks had lost part of his foot in Vietnam, continued
I didn't
serving.
know that.
Right.
Wow, I didn't know
There
that.
was another guy by the name of Gunnery Sergeant Master Gunnery Sergeant Hamlin, who served in MACV-SOG,
Wow.
Vietnam. Recon Marine who lost his leg on a high tension power lines. He hit him
Ooh.
parachuting, took his leg. Did several tours after that as an amputee in Vietnam.
No
My
shit.
pastor,
Wow.
my priest gave me his book, And I started reading about him,
Wow.
and he refers to a Navy pilot that was trying to get back on flight status with no name on it. And then another chaplain shows up who was a Navy or was a Marine backseater in F4s in Vietnam, who became a chaplain in the Air Force. He was telling me about when he went through API. He goes, there was a Navy pilot with two wooden legs on the obstacle course. Just
Shit.
don't remember what happened to him. Don't know who he was. This was 1963
Wow.
when this happened. He goes, just leaving that with you, right? So
Yeah.
when Tommy Hall shows up to my bedside table or my bedside to see
Hmm.
me, he came back from a classified deployment. He coin checks me.
Hmm.
I'm butt naked, right? You know the rules about the coin. You have to have your
Oh
coin,
yeah.
right?
Oh yeah.
He coin checks me. I'm butt naked. I'm like, all I can offer you is morphine, sir. And but he says to me, Johnny, you're gonna be okay. You're gonna get better. You're gonna fly again, and you're gonna stand active duty. Just prior to that, the friggin' docs are telling me you're gonna go through a med board. You're never gonna walk normally again. You're shit. Forget about running. There's no way you're gonna ever fly again. You just need to get that straight in your head, and you deal with that with the wheelchair. And then here comes my commanding officer, who's not a doctor. Again, it
Yeah.
was, and I actually got pissed at him. I was, this guy's blowing smoke up my ass.
Hmm.
And I know he means well, but Shelley was even upset with him. But I didn't know what he knew, right?
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
was putting a plan in action, right?
Hmm.
And so Mr. Francis was also a Civil Air Patrol pilot, thousands of hours, taught a bunch of people how to fly for free. Never was married, never had kids. This was the love of his life, taking care of our vets. And
Yeah.
so he brings when he's trying to convince Shelley to let me go to him in Portsmouth instead of staying in San Antonio where I was being taken care of. And a Navy SEAL, former Navy SEAL doc to work on me for my next series of operations in December. Shelley kind of just looked at him in the face and she says, God, she felt it. God, this is the guy. This is the guy who's going to take care of my husband. And
Nice.
she just, because at this point she's super protective, right?
Oh, I'm sure.
Not letting
Yeah.
this dude out of
Sure.
my sight. And
Yeah.
so Mr. Francis, brings Carl Brashear to my bedside in December in Portsmouth. I didn't know who Carl Brashear was at the time. Nobody really did outside the military,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And big burly black dude in his 60s shows up, looks like Mr. Clean, and
Hmm.
Mr. Francis, short stubby guy, goes, "Hey Carl, tell Lieutenant here what you did in the Navy." I'm in the hospital bed about to go through my fourth knee surgery, and he goes, "Yeah, first black diver." And he goes, "No, no, no, tell him when but." He goes, "Yeah, I lost my leg. We were covering a nuke or something. And, cable snapped and it took my leg. I happened to be standing in the wrong place at the wrong time, and it took it." And he goes, and yeah, first guy to go back to dive status with a prosthetic. And he goes, "Well, what advice do you have for the lieutenant here?" And he goes, Master Chief Brashear pats me on the shoulder, kind of smirk on his face. He goes, "LT, if I can swim and dive and run under ships, I mean, I can run and swim and dive under ships." He goes, "You can get your fat ass back in a helicopter and fly again." So again, senior enlisted, right? And I go,
Yeah. 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 I love it.
young
Yeah.
officer, I'm like, all I could say was, "Yes, Master Chief." That's all I
Yeah.
said to
That's
him.
awesome.
And,
That's awesome.
and then, senior chief, then Chief Rat comes by later and he drops his trowel. "You're going to be fine, brother." And Shelly's like, "Okay, I'm going to leave you two guys at this," he's showing me his leg.
Yeah.
He took me to the gym afterwards and got me strong. And, "Hey, you got to convince people that this is an operational advantage."
Hmm.
I've even taken my leg and shot at it with 7.62.
Nice.
He goes, "A 50 cal will definitely go through it, but you
Yeah.
know, unless it's square on the carbon fiber, 7.62 is going to deflect."
Hmm.
So he's like, "You got to pick in the dude's a stud." He took me, and then, the officer, Pete, mentored me on the other side of this. So things were coming together, but the most important part was, like, when I went back, before all this happened, I had to go, Shelly and I were in the hospital for 3 weeks. We flew home to Pensacola. Everybody's there to meet me and the girls, what we wanted to see. Right.
Yeah.
And, got home playing Jimmy Buffett. Girls, all they wanted to do was ride my wheelchair. They didn't care. They go, they look down. Oh, daddy's hurt, right? But jumping on my lap, wanting the wheelchair ride, right? So that was a huge relief. And then, so while we were in the hospital, my pastor, or excuse me, my padre, I would call him padre at that point. He said, "What are your goals?" And I'm like, "Well,
Mm-hmm.
first and foremost, I want to walk and dance with my wife and daughters again."
Mm-hmm.
And he goes, "Well," he goes, "whatever meaningful goals you have," he goes, "you need to tie an important date to them." Like, okay, that stuck with me for a bit. And then I got with Shelly. I'm like, you know what? Giving's coming up. I want to walk into my aunt's house and my grandparents and my parents could see me walk, not on my wheelchair, not on crutches.
Mm-hmm.
And then the goal was to run by my daughter Lisette's birthday, the oldest one in February. That, you
Wow.
know, and then I'm like, okay, so flying really at that point wasn't like, okay, I'm gonna go back to flying. But if I
Mm-hmm.
am, I gotta do it within a year. And the reason why that year was important is because in aviation, or even like jump status,
Yeah.
if you're
You're gonna lose
down
your.
medically unqualified for 365 days consecutively, you
Yeah.
lose your flight pay financially,
Right.
right?
Right.
You lose your incentive pay, which is a big deal for us at that point because, we weren't making a lot of money,
Yeah.
and you lose your designation.
Mm-hmm.
I got two little holes in my chest from my Navy wings getting slammed in there.
Mm-hmm.
And people nowadays say, your job doesn't define you. Well, you know, it, that you've seen it, with your brother and your dad, right? Your job
Mm-hmm.
does define you. Your job is all encompassing because people's lives are at stake, right? It is your
Yeah.
calling.
Yeah.
And so, you get that stripped away from you. And so that's what I was like, all right, I gotta if I'm gonna do this, I gotta get back to flight status within a year. With There's a bunch of other stuff that happened, Steve, along the way that I truly believe was divine intervention, not coincidence. People who came
Can I?
together to my help, you know, my brothers and sisters that wouldn't let me fail, bottom line, supported me and my family. And so I was able to do those things. I was able to walk into Thanksgiving. Then later I was on with my cane, but, still bleeding in my socket because the stitches hadn't healed yet. And I was able to run really ugly. About a week prior to my daughter's birthday, I was up in Norfolk, Virginia getting work done. And the tech was like, dude, I'm like, can I take a couple more steps up and down the hallway? Can I? And he goes, whoa, because it was a test socket and it's made out of
Yeah.
plastic and they got a plaster around it. So it's not
Mm.
bolted on or anything like that. He goes, dude, be careful. You're going to break the foot. And my prosthetist has been around forever. He goes, dude, just put some more plaster, roll around it. He goes, go ahead, John. So I take a couple jogging steps up and down the hallway. It's raining outside. It's friggin' cold. It's January. And he goes, let's go out in the parking lot. And the tech is like, he's gonna hurt himself. The thing's gonna break. And
Yeah.
Mr. Francis goes, no, let's go. And they had it on videotape, so I take my
Nice.
first steps running, and again, ugly, but I did it. And it was like a week before my daughter's
Yeah.
birthday. So when I got back to Florida,
That's
we were
awesome.
outside playing. I got to dance with my girls. I got to dip my wife and kiss her.
That's awesome, man.
So that was, yeah.
I gotta ask you a couple questions real fast. The dev group commander, obviously we can just use a first name.
Well, the
I
dev group commander at that time was Captain Olson, who later became Admiral Olson. But this guy was not the commander of dev group. He was a lieutenant commander assigned to dev group at the time.
okay. Well, did he have a prosthetic leg?
Yeah. He,
So
yeah.
I think Don Mann, who was just on the show, knows him
Well, yeah, he
because I
does.
think he mentioned
Yeah.
him. So that's crazy how there's
Yeah. But
that
out of
connection there.
respect, and a lot of guys know his name and they say it freely, but out of respect, and his name's in the book, not in this version, in a later version, because Admiral
Mm.
McRaven said just, he
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so, um, everyone and I put by name, full name in the
Hmm.
book. I got their permission first, right?
Right, right,
And
right. Well,
I
I was just tying it together. It's kind of
hadn't been
cool
able to get a
collecting.
hold of Pete. So I'm like,
Mm.
but everybody in the community knows who this guy is and
Yeah, yeah,
knows the
yeah.
incredible stuff he's done for our country.
Well, and I just brought it up because Don mentioned him in the show, and I don't want to say his name or anything, but it's just
Yeah.
cool how it's come back around. And then I wanted to ask you, so did you go back to the Navy or did you stay in the Air
So
Force? Because I missed
yeah,
that part.
so
So
it was a 4-year exchange, right? my boss
Oh,
was
okay,
telling
that
me,
makes
"You still
sense.
owe me 2 more years at least." The Navy was gonna take me, they wanted me to come back, and it was interesting because again, I think if I was just a Navy guy in a Navy squadron,
Mhm.
this might have not happened. If I was an Air
Right.
Force guy in a Special Ops Air Force squadron, this might have not happened. I think because of
Mhm.
this exchange tour, right, and the fact that, I was with the platoon from SEAL Team 4 and, Pete
Mhm.
got involved and then senior chief, uh, I think all these things just came together at the right place at the right time to make it happen. Because remember, back
Mhm.
then, nobody was on active duty doing this stuff. We didn't
Right,
have
right.
those programs like they do have now, like the Care Coalition or the Warrior programs. Shit, the
Mhm.
hospitals didn't even know how to stock any prosthetic parts.
Yeah.
The company, there was a company, and I'll say their name right out. Ohio Willowwood at the time. Now they've changed their name. The owners, Bob Abergast, who's an engineer, owned this company forever. Mr. Francis went to work for them, and he said, "Look, I have
Hmm.
3 sons that you got to take care of for the rest of their lives."
Hmm.
And the owner made that promise. And for 15 years, the Air Force or the VA never paid for a leg. Ohio
Wow.
Willowwood made us our legs. Mr. Francis fit us. We used to go back in the shop and work on the legs. There's no way a prosthetist is going to let you go back in the shop and work on your own leg because he knew
Right.
that we would have to be out in the field and take care of our own equipment. And we treated
Yeah.
it as such. There was Rat, Senior Chief Rat, who said, "John, this is operational gear, dude. Like,
Mhm.
we're jumping out of airplanes with it. You're going to be flying in a cockpit with it. This is not medical gear. This is freaking operational gear." And that's the way we
Yeah,
treated
yeah.
it.
What was that first flight like for you when you got back in the seat?
It was awesome. So my
I
first
bet.
flight was with Mr. Francis in his Cessna
Nice.
152. And
Okay.
he goes, "You can do this. You just got to figure it out." He's letting me adjust the seat, how to, adjust the pedals just right. And then I went up in his Cessna 206. And helicopter's a little more complicated,
Oh,
especially
yeah.
an H60 or a 53 because you got toe brakes
Mhm.
and you got these little micro switches and stuff. And so it worked out that the angles were just right. I just had to move
Hmm.
my seat up a little more forward. And if I flew with armor plating, I had to take my back plate off so that I could
Mm.
just so that the cyclic wouldn't be all the way up in my crotch. And I just taxied, on the ground a little bit more gingerly. In fact, the maintenance guys
Yeah.
used to give me crap. "Hey, sir, the left puck is a lot more worn because you're mashing it with your foot, right?" And they paint disabled parking spots on the helicopter spot.
Oh, man.
That kind of. All right. So my first flight, my first after. I mean, again, there was all kinds of red tape and stuff. It's in the book.
Well, I'm
I
sure, I'm
had a
sure.
board just like Men of Honor when I'm standing at attention and all these people are voting.
Yeah.
And my drill instructor was there. My
Hmm.
AOCS drill instructor
No
showed up
kidding.
10 years later. I don't know if you got to that part
Wow.
yet,
Not yet, not
right?
yet,
And
no.
so, yeah, Master Gunnery Sergeant Holtree, United States Marine Corps, because you got to say the whole thing,
That's
right?
Yeah, you do, you gotta say it, yeah.
He showed up and told the admiral, he goes, "Hey, he's in his class A's at this board." And he goes, "Master Guns." He was a senior Marine on Naval Air Station Pensacola. He goes, "What?" Or senior, enlisted Marine. Admiral goes,
Mhm.
"Hey, what are you doing here?" And he goes, "Sir, I'm here to support one of my officers that survived my class back in 1987. If he can get through me, he
Wow.
can get through anything."
That's
So
awesome,
it's a
man.
pretty cool story,
That's very cool.
it's true. So Master Guns, although I hated him at first when he was Gunnery Sergeant Holtree,
Yeah.
he, yeah, he's a godsend. So, my first flight with Tommy Hall finally gets approved. The night before, he gets word from the Air Force staff, "Yes, you could do this." A week
Hmm.
prior, because it was when I went through all this board formal stuff, and so it was July when the medical guys voted that yes, you can go back to flying. And then it had to get staffed all the way in naval, the chief of naval operations staff and BUPERS, bureau personnel, and then the chief of staff, the CNO's office. And then it had to go to the Air Force because I'm in an Air Force squadron so that they can allow me to fly. So they're going back and forth, all this crap. Finally, on September 3rd or 4th, my commander gets a phone call. Clear to go, we're good to go. We'll send the paperwork to follow. That night, he changes the flight schedule to put me on the flight the next day. He goes, "Johnny, we're flying tomorrow." And Shelly had to go to work. She couldn't take off of work.
No.
So and she got to be there to see me land. But I took off, man, and it was like glorious. And um, my bros are, in the helicopter. He let me shoot a day water operations kind of, where
Oh, cool.
you land on the water. the tail gunner's riding the ramp. And so we
Yeah.
described that in the book. And it's funny because when I wrote it, I'm like, okay, I got to get all the calls correctly, because my bros, if they read this and then that's something's wrong or the right call's not in there written, and I'm going to get all kinds of crap. So I had one of my favorite flight engineers who was a mentor to me and also took care of our family by the name of Randy Anderson. I go, Randy, I need you to look at this, make sure all the calls and all the sequence and stuff is correct,
Mhm.
because this is 30 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm hoping that, all my Pablo guys out there or any Hilo guys going to go, that's bullshit. That's not what you say in the cockpit.
Yeah.
So, but we got to it, we got to land. And like, when I call back to maintenance to go, hey, we're Alpha One, which means we're good to go. And they give you
Mhm.
a parking spot assignment. And the controller on the radio goes, Cowboy. And it was 2-1, but 11 is a lucky number for us, 11, 11,
Mhm.
make a wish kind of thing.
Yeah,
So in the
yeah.
book, it's Cowboy 1-1. And because that's one of the things the Pablo guys go, yeah, 1-1. It's usually 2-1 or 3-1, but so Cowboy 1-1, you're cleared, and usually they say, a letter for the, line and a number for the spot. You're cleared Hotel 1, disabled parking. Show up, there's a, disabled sign up, right?
That's awesome.
And then also one of the gunner took a disabled sign from one of the parking spots in on base and actually put it in our window as we were taxiing up. So, I get out, I get hosed down with champagne, and then,
Yeah.
and Shelly's there, and our youngest daughter, Nicole, made it. Lisette couldn't,
Very
she
cool.
couldn't get to our other daughter, Lisette, our oldest, because she was in kindergarten at the time.
Mm.
And she couldn't get to her in time to show up to see me land. So big celebration. But Tommy Hall, my commander, pulls me aside, because, local base paper takes pictures and all that. And
Yeah.
he pokes me in the chest. He goes, dude, and because he says, dude, he goes, this was for show. He goes, you're going to have to prove to me that you're capable of flying in combat. And I'm giving you your
Yeah.
check ride. At that point, I
Wow.
was like, cool, sir. Good to
Yeah.
go. I
Yeah.
can, I'm like, yeah, I can do it. Pass my check ride later. That's all in the epilogue, by the way. The book is
Okay.
basically ends on that note. And we got stuff in the epilogue to honor the guys that we lost and other things that happened, helping other amputees and actually finally going to a Jimmy Buffett concert with my kids as
Nice.
adults. It
Nice.
was actually Jimmy Buffett's last concert. Jimmy Buffett sent me
Wow.
a picture. I have a pirate peg leg picture of me in front of a helicopter with a sword and a peg leg.
Oh,
And
that's
and
awesome,
and
dude.
it was sitting in his office for years. I thought it was the
Really?
Key West office, and that's what it said in the book, but it was actually his Los Angeles office. So there's a typo
Wow.
there. But you know,
Yeah.
one of the guys from the Wounded Warrior Project said, "Doesn't matter, John. We still saw it in his office, and we're all like, yeah, that's
Yeah.
Johnny."
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, how did Shelly feel about you, flying again? Was she
So
on board with that, or was she nervous
she
about it?
was terrorized.
I
She,
bet.
and
I
God
bet.
bless her, because she would ask me, say, "Look, I don't care if I talk to you, 'cause she knew, like, I was going back to flying at night, right?
Mhm.
Just leave me a message right after you land when you go to maintenance, to talk, to do your debrief. Just call me, leave a
Yeah.
message, say I'm on the ground, I'm safe." And for years, I mean, she would cry. She said she'd cry herself to bed, but she knew this is what I love to do, just like she
Yeah.
loved to nurse. And God bless her. Sometimes I guess I was so self focused on this project that, I didn't really appreciate what she was going through.
She sounds like an amazing woman.
She's the glue, because later, after the wars, I was gone. She primarily raised her kids.
Yeah.
Again, I wasn't gone for a year at a time, but in
Right.
special ops, you're gone, you turn
Special
around,
ops,
come
you're gone a
home,
lot.
the pager
Yeah.
goes off again and you're off again, right?
Well, and people forget too, you're training, you're going where those customers are too, even when you're stateside,
Even when
so
you're stateside,
yeah.
you're with the customers, training with the
Yep.
customers, right?
Yep.
And then when I went back to the 6 SOS, so when the commander there wanted me to come back as an ADO, he wanted me there because they were expanding their mission. He goes, he knew that I understood the true dangers of just flying with another country in a different language.
Yeah.
He wanted
Yeah.
me there, and he had to come to dinner along with another one of my friends in that unit that were recruiting me to convince Shelly that this is the place I needed to go. She was like, I don't want you near that squadron anymore.
Stay away from
Right. So
him.
then not only
Yes.
that, then we went off to a staff tour and then I come back to command that squadron.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
So she,
That's the 666
yeah,
reference,
right.
right? Man, that's wild. That's wild. Well, and just by the title I'm looking at, Colonel, I'm assuming you finished out
Yep.
in
Just
the Air Force.
just under 24 years.
Nice, man.
You know, and there's a misconception out there, especially among my Air Force bros, that the Navy didn't want me back. That's not true. It was the Navy Board of Flight Surgeons that got me to fly again.
Hmm.
I was in this transition period, and I was going to be assigned to be like the deputy air ops or on the USS Tripoli, which is a brand new amphib at the time, which is a great job, but it's called the Disassociated Sea Tour. You're not flying during
Mm.
that period. I just fought a
Yeah.
year to try to keep flying.
To go fly. Yeah.
So I applied to what's called the TAR program, and I can't remember what it stands for, Technical Air Reservist, or and the Navy had two special ops squadrons that were descended of the HAL squadron. It's called HCS 4 and 5. I was going to go to HCS 5. They were just arming the H-60 then, and all my
Uh,
night vision goggle time, I was going to be able to apply to that. So I got accepted to TAR, but at the same time, then I was offered an inter-service transfer to the Air Force.
wow.
Now,
Nice.
like you said, you've heard, that's happened at the 160th.
Yeah.
The elite special ops, Army units have used that to get people to come from one service to the other, especially for
Hmm.
officers.
Yeah.
And shit, the Air Force used it for U-2s and the SR-71 program back in
Hmm.
the day. So the Air Force
Wow.
was using that to get people to come into special ops. So I was already qualified. And then the only thing is, what they were trying to figure out was what my data rank was going to be, because I'd been selected to be an 04 lieutenant commander.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the Air Force assignments officer, they're, look, you've already been accepted. Just pin on. Let's just pin on lieutenant commander. That will be your date of rank. And now it makes it easier for me. I don't have to figure out what your data rank would be in the Air Force.
Yeah.
And that's what happened.
That's
A
awesome,
month
man. That's
later,
awesome.
so March, I got promoted in 98 to lieutenant commander. A month later, I was sworn into the Air Force
Hmm.
in shorts
Very
and,
cool.
and running shorts. And I had to sing the
Nice.
Air Force song by myself in front of the whole
That's
squad.
hilarious. That's hilarious. Wait, so when did you get out of the Air Force?
I
What year was
retired
that?
in 2010, September 2010.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
My last job was as um, defense and air attaché. I was a senior officer in Bolivia. And that itself
Wow.
was a freaking ride, but different intel shit that was going on there. I was actually formally accused by the Bolivian government of trying to execute a coup.
Man, you need a movie, dude.
Yeah.
Like,
So
you've got an incredible
no,
story. I
I mean,
mean,
I used to tell people it's a good Reader's Digest story or
yeah,
a
no,
Hallmark,
it's more
But
than
my
that.
daughter, God bless her, Lisa, and I'm going to brag on her now. Lisette Alvarez, she's a award-winning podcaster. She's a great storyteller. Her God-given talent is writing. She wrote
Mhm.
this book as a biography 10 years ago. She researched it.
Wow.
She, as an adult, the stuff that we protected her from,
Mhm.
she interviewed people, me, my wife, my mom, my dad. She made made everybody sob when she was interviewing my
Yeah.
mom and my dad, the flight surgeons, my commander. And she put the story together. And at first it was more like a biography. She
Mhm.
wrote it 10 years ago. 2017 is when she presented it to me on my birthday. She had already written it. And I kind of paused. I'm like, well, if we publish it, we print it, it's just for our family. Because she had all the personal stuff in there. She had my testimony in there, basically. And actually she didn't have all of it, because we didn't discuss it here, but I did have a vision while I was in the hospital. I don't know if you got
Really?
into it yet, with St.
Not
Michael,
yet. No, not yet. Wow.
with St. Mary and with Jesus.
Hmm. Wow.
And and I, for years I thought maybe it was some morphine, but my pastor was like, no, John. And so I struggled with whether I wanted to release that
Yeah.
until I read PJ's book. I read um uh Laverly's book.
Yeah.
Um and I became a grandfather. And my wife's like, this is your legacy to your grandson.
Yeah,
and the other
definitely.
grandchildren are coming. And then my pastor reminded me, he said, I don't want to hear the John Wayne part, John. I want to hear the part of your struggles. That's what people need to hear because,
Exactly.
you know, I'm like, so I was nervous about that. I go, I want all my buds to know the John Wayne part, right? I don't, as a pilot, as a special operator, you never want to admit weakness, right?
Right,
You know that,
right.
and so, but it's true. I mean, you can't come back from a devastating, you know,
Mm-mm.
uh, injury or something that strips you of identity without help. And at some point,
Yeah.
you have to acknowledge that you need help,
You have
and
to surrender.
right,
And
exactly, you surrender to God, to faith, and to the grace. And when I say grace, it's not just the grace from God, from the grace of the people that come out of nowhere
mhm.
to help you. And that's where my
Yeah.
son reminded me, Dad, people gave grace to you. They didn't even
Mhm.
know you, right?
Yeah.
You need to do the same later. You need to carry that. That's what Jesus taught us,
Mhm.
right? You're not nice to a person because they're nice. You're nice to a person
No.
because of you, what's in your
Right.
heart.
Right. Right. Well, tell our, viewers, John, when does the book come out?
It was Monday, the Sunday, the day
Okay.
before Memorial Day. The Kindle version is out. It's already in pre-order if you want to get it.
Okay.
Um, there were we did a bootleg run so we could see the book, right?
Nice.
Um,
Yeah.
and my daughter, I'm the with, but she's the author. Walk, run, fly again. The three
Mhm.
things that that I was told I was never going to do. Um, so it's out on Kindle Sunday. It's out on paperback
Okay.
on Sunday through Amazon. Um,
Okay.
Ingram Sparks is the hardcover publisher, and they're distributing it to to Amazon, to books and books.com, to Barnes and Noble. Um,
Okay.
what we decided, these hardcovers came out. We only brought a couple to Naval Helicopter Association a week before, and this past week, we're at SOF, Special Operations Forces Week, and we were able to sneak, you know, about 100 copies out of the printer. We had to pay for them up front,
Nice.
but my bros, Jeremy Trump, I was able to give the first copy to him, the guy who helped pull me out of the river. And my daughter and I got to talk about it at Soft Week as guest speakers, and I had him up on the stage with me. So
And that's the photo you sent me,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Before we went on air?
this photo was taken, 30 years ago, right after my first flight. There's a
No,
lot
with
of pictures
Jeremy.
for all my military friends. There's a lot of pictures in it. You don't have to do a lot of reading, but it reads like a novel, and you go,
Yeah.
did this really happen? I go, yeah, it really happened. My daughter did an incredible job writing it. Admiral McRaven just gave her a glowing endorsement about how the book reads. So, and it's coming out on Memorial Day for a reason.
Mhm.
Brian Downs, the guy who pulled me out of the river, is the guy I lost in Iraq in 2005 on Memorial Day, along with Captain Fresquez, Captain Argel, Tech Sergeant Casey Crate, and an Iraqi captain, Ali Abbas, who we consider a brother. He saved one of my guys and hit him in a ditch before the bad guys got him, so our Kazvac could pick him up. We lost these guys on Memorial Day in 2005. There's other guys in the book that are no longer with us. And that's why I pushed for Memorial Day release because, Brian's kids were not given the same grace my daughter was. My daughter's very good friends with Brian's daughter. Brian's daughter had a chance to look through the section about her dad. So that's why. That's why it's coming
Yeah.
out this weekend to honor those guys that brought me home and that are no longer with us. And I had to say their names. Apologies, it's taking a little more time, but it's
No, I'm glad you
you have
did.
to
You
say,
need they
just like
yes.
Craig Valentine and Tom Larson and the crew there. And there's
Mhm.
other folks here. Len King, the first guy I told you was my supervisor. We lost
Mhm.
him to cancer a few years ago.
Oh, man.
So, and there's a couple more folks in there. So, that's why, again, by the grace of my brothers and sisters, is why I'm still here. And I was able to do what I was able to do. And then later to pass it on, that same grace to other folks who were able to keep serving our country with prosthetics.
Well, you are definitely an inspiration, my friend,
Thank you.
and, I am just honored to sit here tonight and just not only get to know you, but to share your story because it needs to be shared. And I love the fact that we're able to tie the gospel into it and to talk about the glory and the grace and the salvation and forgiveness of Jesus and just it's powerful, man. And I was thinking about this earlier when you were talking, when you were in the river and you were going through the Lord's Prayer, to me that really sounded like that's when you really surrendered and said, God, like, he was there with you, and then obviously through the whole process. But that showed, in my opinion, that's the humility. Not dying and bleeding out river and you're angry and you're pissed off, but you're speaking with God, please, take take my legs and let me see my girls. I mean, that's powerful, man. That's
So
powerful.
my pastor who I hadn't talked to in a long time, I called him. It was Easter week. It was, Holy Week when I called him, and I was
Mhm.
able to get a hold of him this past April. And I wanted to ask his permission to put his name in the book. It's in the acknowledgement section. I said, his name's Dan Morse. His son now is the pastor at Navarre Methodist Church
Wow.
where we attended, and he's the one who got me to tell the story the first time. And I called him. I said, "Hey, I finally got it, and I want to make sure that that part of the reason why it's out is and the why it's written is because of you." And he goes, "John," he goes, and again, pastors are always working on you, right? They're all, and he goes, "I'm going to tell your story on Easter Sunday." He goes, "And I want to remind you," he goes, "I remember you explaining to me how that ugly, muddy, black water river that you were in." He goes, "I want to remind you that you were reborn in that river. You were rebaptized in that river. As ugly and as dirty as that water was, because remember, you never gotten an infection." He was reminding me
Yeah.
of all those little details.
Yeah.
He goes, "And that's the story I'm telling on Easter Sunday." I
Wow.
had to pull over, Steve. I broke down. I was in the car when we were discussing this. I was visiting our grandbaby in
Hmm.
in Cupertino, California. I had to pull over.
It's powerful, man.
Yeah.
That's powerful. Um, would you like to share a scripture with our audience tonight? I've got one too, but would you like to share? Is there a scripture that kind of carried you through this process, or is there something that kind of jumped out at you to help you through the recovery process?
Um, Isaiah 40:31, I think it is, or is it 30:41? So I used to carry on my long runs, later when I was trying to heal myself again after losing these guys, is when I started to run marathons as an amputee.
Wow.
And I would carry the names of my bros, and on the other side, it was Saya. And it's about running and having the strength to get through it.
Hmm. That's awesome, man. That's awesome. I want to share one too. I wrote this down before we got on air tonight, but Joshua 1:9 kind of jumped out at me. Be strong and courageous. God is with you. And I think your whole testimony really is summed up by that one verse. I mean, he was with you through the whole the whole event and then continuing forward to where we are today, which is just incredible, man. Like I really, and John, I haven't said this yet, but I admire your courage because to come on a podcast, especially with someone like me, we don't really know each other, and you're sharing this with the whole world. I mean, it's out there. And then you wrote a book. The book's not, the book is it's in print. It's out. It's
It's
coming
out,
out.
and
But
so
yeah,
I
yeah.
I
It's too
think I
late to stop it now.
I I came to terms with that. I came to terms with that a couple months ago because I struggled. And again, my 26-year-old son, with all the wisdom of a 26-year-old, is the one who said, "No, Dad, all those things you need to tell, that I thought were super, very personal, that I shouldn't be sharing." And the same thing with my pastor. And so I think I came to terms with it in February around my daughter's birthday, because I told her, I said, "All right, I'm out." I mean, like you said, I surrendered again. I
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
surrendered one more time. And I go, and I talked to PJ. I called PJ Wright, and he said, "Sir, people need to hear that part of your story."
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I've come to terms with it. I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm still kind of bracing and a little nervous about it. But yeah. and God bless my daughter because she's the one who pulled it out of us and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
told the
She did an amazing
story in a
job.
way that truly will move people. So,
Yeah.
I'm super proud of her. It's interesting. Shelley, when she was saying, "No, you got to tell this part, Dad, John,"
Hmm.
and then our editors were like, "You know what? We want to hear Shelley's side of this too." And so now she had to surrender also
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and relive her fears and her doubts. And God bless her because it will also help those who are taking care of people who are injured
Yep.
and the spouses.
Yep.
So I'm hoping as a team that, this message goes out to the people that need to hear it.
It will. Yeah, it will. You're going to inspire a lot of people, my friend, a lot. How do you feel? Would you like to close this out with a prayer, or would you more comfortable if I did it? You want me to do it? Okay. Dear Heavenly Father, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for just bringing John into my life and the ability to sit down tonight and to share his amazing story. God, you are so good. And we both know tonight that John has a powerful testimony, and it's all because of you, Lord, and your love and your grace and your mercy. I pray, Lord, that this episode will impact those that have both served in the military as members of the military and also family members of the military, children of military members like myself, and just people that need to hear how powerful you are, Lord, that may not know you, and just to see how good you are, and the stuff that John has been through and has overcome and is continuing to do great things with his life and impact others in a positive way. And I pray, Lord, that you will bless John and his family, that you will bless the people that are watching this episode, the ones that are listening to it, and just use us, Lord, to further your kingdom and to make you famous and to use this book to inspire people, Lord. It's in your mighty name that I pray. Amen. John, thank you so much for your service. Thank you for your courage to come on here, and I'm grateful for PJ to make the introduction, but just to be able to talk with you, especially with Memorial Day coming up. I lost a really good friend. Ken Ballard and I were in ROTC together in college, and he was killed on May 26, 2004. And it was before I joined the Navy, but he followed. He was an enlisted guy and went ROTC and ended up joining the Army. And it's a long story, but we were really good friends in college. And his death is one that's always kind of stood out to me, just because of the closeness we had in college. So it's always kind of a reminder, this time of year of the sacrifices that so many have made for this country. And man, my hat's off to you, brother. Like you are a certified badass,
Or,
sir. I mean, you're an
like I said,
awesome
I'm
dude.
I'm blessed to be alive because of badasses that saved me.
Well, yeah,
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 and like you said, Memorial Day, it's not about us. It's about our bros and sisters that are no longer with us and their families. Because Memorial Day for those Gold Star families is
hmm,
every day, right? It's
yeah,
every day,
yeah,
and that's why we honor them. And it's important to say their names when you can, because
yeah.
that
It is.
yeah, that's how they get remembered.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. And you that are watching right now, please share this episode. Let's get the
Yep.
word out about John's story.
Yep.
And if you
Yep.
rather listen to it, it's on Spotify, Amazon, and Apple Podcasts. But let's share this story and help
Yep.
just inspire others.
And if
Especially
anybody, oh, by the way, I mean, I'll make one last pitch for my daughter. www.walkrunfly again.com. You can, whatever form of the book is out, you can order it through there or get to the sites through there. And there's more stuff in there. Like we have a soundtrack, a playlist. Thanks,
nice,
thanks to PJ.
nice, nice,
Thanks to PJ who encouraged me to do that. He goes, "No, sir, people need
nice.
to hear the music that you listened to when you were working out, when you were
Yeah,
struggling, when you met your wife, all that stuff."
right,
So,
right.
yeah, that again, you know, one last thing. I know we already said you know, throughout my life, like I said, I thought the Lord was done with me, gave me my
Hmm.
miracle, move on, help someone else.
Hmm.
Something else pops up, right? And you go, shit, it's calling me again. So until your last dying breath, I also surrender that. I go, I'm sure something else will come up where I need to do this, and that's where we're at.
Yes, sir. I mean, God is good. And this has been an incredible episode, man. I'm just so honored to share your
Yeah. And
story.
I'm truly grateful that I get to do it on your show
Well,
because
and I'm honored. I'm honored that you
because of
chose
this
me to
part,
share your story.
because of our testimony and because of our belief. I think I'm grateful that you gave me the opportunity to do this on your show.
Well, and likewise, and I'm honored. I mean, I'm honored that you chose me to be the first to share your story, man. I really am. Really am. I owe PJ. But a good dude. How did you guys meet, by the way? I
So
forgot to ask you that
he
earlier.
was a gunner. He was a gunner and I was a pilot.
Oh, so you guys were on the
Pablos.
same
Yeah,
aircraft. Okay. Well,
exactly.
I
We
thought
flew
maybe that's
together,
how you guys knew
right?
each other. I didn't know
Later
if you
I
actually
went off
flew
to the
together.
6SOS, right? But he continued because his injury and his stuff,
Yeah.
happened after I was flying with him. But we flew together. So
I assumed that, but
yeah,
I didn't know if you guys were on the same bird or you're just
yeah,
in the same squadron.
yep.
Okay.
No, yep,
Very
we
cool.
were.
Very cool, man. Well, John, thank you again so much, and I'm just really grateful for your time and for your trust in me to share your story, and you're going to impact so many people with your testimony, brother.
Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you so much. You too, brother.
Cheers.